Okay, I got the red smoke.
Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
What would you like to talk about, Jeff? You know what's great? I was thinking about this when you were on your way up here. The number of people that we know in common, but yet we had not actually crossed paths over the number of years we've known those people in common was kind of shocking.
Yeah, I find that to be true with a lot of people, but us in particular, yeah. I've had conversations with you as a subject matter for, 5, 6, 7 years at least. And yeah, here we are, finally in Montana.
Yeah, we were separated by, I don't know, a good 100 miles for the last.
It's all right. It's not for lack of trying, you know?
It wasn't for lack of trying, for sure. There's absent the world burning down, literally and figuratively right now, there was some cool, or I should say maybe positive aspects of the COVID era. And I actually can't believe that that's a thing now, the COVID era.
Yeah, current still, huh?
Current, but it allowed me to do things like connect the dots on stuff like this.
For
because
sure.
I had some more time off. I mean, there were some negatives for sure, and I know some people's lives have been drastically impacted, but at the same time, hopefully families are tighter. I'm glad that we could connect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
yeah.
the number of hobbies that we share in common is also relatively insane.
Yeah.
You're a little deeper than I am in the hobby hole, which is...
Well, I've been accused of worse, I guess. But yeah, it is interesting the necessity to be socially responsible and sort of, the quarantine era that we've been dealing with for the last several months, really. If anything, it's shown me what's important and what isn't. And I think so much of what we enjoy doing is about that, And
yeah.
So being able to have some quiet time, I know, and I'm sure you're probably similar, going hard for a lot of years, I sort of have found myself craving quiet time with the family and some downtime and time to sort of process and think about things. And if anything good was to come from dealing with the pandemic, it's been, being able to stay a little closer to home. Certainly, as my daughter gets older, I've been finding more and more value in making sure that I can play a role in her life that has influence. Obviously, as a parent, you always are going to have influence on how your children see the world or whatever. But
and not always positively.
For sure. And, for us, it's been really important to instill a few values in her and the way she sees the world relative to things like respect and integrity. And she's always had a voice in our house, even from the time she was little. I never said, "Oh yeah, good girl, Naya." It was always, that was a good choice, because words are important, and she needs to understand that choices have consequence, and it's important to respect yourself. And, respecting yourself allows you to have the empathy to respect others. And I think giving her a voice now as a teenager, she just turned 16. A lot of people say, "Oh my God, man, you're on the sharp end." Honestly, she's such a good person.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that comes from A, respecting herself, and B, because she's gotten a lot of respect from her mother and I, that she, in turn, lo and behold, she respects us back. And, seeing her sort of graduate from an adolescent into a really free-thinking young woman has been super rewarding, and being home for that is something that I'm really grateful for during this kind of strange time in the world.
I don't know if you can emphasize enough the value of teaching or having respect for yourself.
For sure.
Because I don't think if you have that anchor in the ground, you're just a ship adrift.
Yeah, and I think it's always been an important concept in my own life. How can you expect anybody to respect you if you don't respect them back? And obviously respect is earned in the same way that character and integrity is earned. But I think that it's really important to remember that point. Like I've told her, I don't care who it is, you don't have to respect anybody that doesn't respect you back, because your thoughts and your character and your integrity and who you are and what you say and how you behave, those are the things you can control, and those are important enough that it's okay to stand up for them, you know, and I think in turn, if she feels respected and she respects herself, then she feels more secure, she feels safe, she feels comfortable, she believes in herself, she's willing to go out and try new things. And, you know, most importantly, she's going to stand up for people who are, you know, unable to stand up for themselves. And certainly it's cool to see her as a young teenager, you know, thinking critically about things like gender equality and racial equality and a lot of these issues that, like you said, are kind of creating this fucking dumpster fire that's happening right now.
And they're not easy to unpack.
No,
I've had
not at
people
all.
reaching out to me for the last week, like, when are you going to get involved? When are you going to say something? And I'm at a loss as to what to say, because I feel like the issues are so nuanced and complex that I don't have the experience in everything that is happening to unpack it properly.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like we were saying before we started recording, I've determined, and this term came from when Mike Glover, SF dude, was sitting right there, and we were talking about experts versus enthusiasts.
Yeah.
And I don't feel comfortable on any one topic to speak in definitive terms. I don't feel like I have a mastery of any one thing. Out of all the things that I've done in my life, even my old job, and even things inside of that job, I'm not a good enough person behind a rifle to speak definitively about the only way to train or the only way to do something. But I'm an enthusiast about it. But because I recognize, I might have an opinion based on experience, but I just don't think it's broad enough that I have anything of an impactful nature to offer. I'm baffled by a lot of what I see going on.
Well, two things I would say to that is one, the reason why, you know, I see and know you to be a skilled individual at many things is because you do have that mindset. I think it's super important to have a beginner's mind and to always think of the world from that standpoint, from someone who has a lot to learn, because if you feel otherwise, then
you're on an egg timer.
that's it. Yeah. Okay. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that it's really difficult to look at the world from a perspective other than your own, because, you know, we as human beings see the world through the filters of our egos, and it's really hard to not see the world through our own eyes, you know, to see it through someone else's eyes, to feel like a smaller part of something much bigger, and to feel insignificant or to realize our insignificance is not easy to do when everything relates to, you know, our mortality and the way we interact with the world around us, right? So just, you know, what you were saying about not knowing what to say, well, you know, on what platform? Social media is such a limited, how are you going to explain, or how would I explain a complex issue and the way I feel about it emotionally and logically in a fucking fortune cookie paragraph next to a photo that was on my iPhone? It's just stupid, right? It's a stupid platform.
It's almost a futile attempt to begin with.
Right. And yet, you know, when you try, it is nice. Like I made a post yesterday because I felt like, you know, if there was a statement to make and there was anybody listening, that it was, you know, maybe a fairly generalized but pretty personal thing to feel and I wanted to say. I had a comment from a woman who pointed out some of its shortcomings, and, you know, I think it's important to have the mirror held up, and I think that it's important to look at things from other perspectives and to realize what I'm saying with good intention isn't necessarily the way it's taken from people who are, you know, neck deep in it. And, you know, in other words, I think in my post, I said, you know, like, I don't care what color hair, what color eyes, what color skin, I see everybody the same as me. And it's a very logical concept for me to want to treat people the way I want to be treated. You know, it's a very, it seems like a very sort of profound or foundational moral statement to say, I'm going to treat someone else the way that I would hope to be treated. And you know, I think she came back and said, you know, it's important to remember the difference so that we can understand the way we interact with the world and the way a minority or a, you know, person of color interacts with the world. And, you know, my comment back was, well, you know, to feel equal on every level inherently, and yet to acknowledge the inequalities inherently can be done. You know, that's possible. But it's like, you know, this is a conversation between two people about a very complex issue, and how do you have it in a
on Instagram.
It's just impossible, right? But I think that it is healthy to see that, you know, sometimes it takes a dumpster fire to recognize how many people care, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, and that's where I get lost. Like I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and you know, people can think or say what they want about my unwillingness so far to make a statement. It's not due to not having something to say. Like it's due to not knowing what to say. And I look at there's a lot of things that I understand, and then it starts to lose me a little bit as it gets to the fringes, as most things do.
Yep.
I land in the middle on most things, and I can understand an anger to the point where you're going to lash out at what you whatever you through your optics see as a system that is pressing against you. I totally understand that. When it gets to the point where pictures now of people are essentially shopping, you know, it becomes protest. Like I'll sit there and I'd give my life to allow somebody the right to protest, hands down. And I don't care what the issue is. But when it comes to it changes to let's burn this down because I want it to be burned down. And then the aspect of we're just going to, you know, I don't understand the equity exchange of I'm going to take something, a physical item, because I'm angry. I don't understand the equity exchange that goes from somebody who feels like they've been oppressed. Is there a relief of that? You know what I mean? Like I get lost in that form of thought. And I think, and again, it's at the fringes because I am a true believer of not allowing the anomaly to paint the norm. And I don't think that most people have any interest in looting. They have an interest in changing the system. And you know what? I support them 100%. But it's so goddamn hard to make a statement that encompasses all of that.
It is. I mean, I see, okay, so, you know, you have a significant portion of our country feeling like there is unpredictable potential for violence when they leave their homes. And that is being shown by this level of protest that is unpredictable and violent. But I think that you're right. I think people are, you know, I always say kind of a person is a smart, informed individual, and people tend to be, you know, dumb, stupid animals when they get together. It's like a mob of people who
the mob mentality is a true thing.
And you know, when someone is feeling, and I don't mean that to, you know, sort of point my finger at anybody or to think that I'm any different. It's just that I think when someone feels, you know, slighted or impoverished or they feel desperate, then they tend to be opportunistic. And I know I've, you know, on a superficial level have felt that. And so, you know, justified in the act of going into a store and you know, stealing from someone.
I don't know another way to
it's not. There is no other way to describe it. I mean, I think when you were if you were to take somebody who had this issue at their core, and they were, you know, willing to die for that issue, but with, you know, perfect moral standard, then they would burn the town down, but block the door from anybody stealing from someone else, you know. And I think that there are a lot of people who are just seeing this happen, and you know, they're just opportunity, you know. And
there are people out there who just want to see the shit burned to the ground. I mean, that's as crazy it is for me to say those words and recognize that even in this, you know, I feel incredibly lucky to have the opportunities that we have. And there are people out there who are like, fuck this.
Right.
Let's burn this ship to the ground. And I understand being pressed into the corner and feeling like you have no other action than to try to burn it to the ground. But I hope that those people are there for the build it back up phase, because burning it down isn't actually solving the problem.
Oh, it's not solving anything.
Yeah, it might open the door to a potential solution. I mean, I'm sure there's a way that you could line out those breadcrumbs that would terminate it in it being better, but there's so many steps along the way other than striking a match. And if those people aren't as dedicated to those steps, I have a really hard time getting behind them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think lighting a fire might light the way, but it doesn't build the way, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I have like you, a high level of empathy and certainly an understanding for what's happening. Do I agree with the way it's happening? No, I don't think. I think anger is often an emotion that brings out irrationality in people, And
I've seen it in myself plenty of times.
me too. And yeah, and so that statement is from experience. And I mean, I think right now, I think people should just think about, we use the word solidarity so loosely, but
Yeah.
I think that really we do need to understand that we all want the same things. We all want dignity and respect and prosperity and happiness and love and a good dog.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think
Or for the weird people, like a cat.
Yeah, right, right.
Let's be honest, fuck those people. Just kidding, cat owners.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that you're weird, okay? Except
Yeah.
for Sheldon. I know a cat named Sheldon. He's not weird at all. He's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we have cats and dogs, and some of our
Damn it.
cats think they were dogs, and some of our dogs think they're cats. So, but I do think that it's just important to, be kind to other people, and right now to understand that, the greater good is as important as the statement, and to be able to live with that statement at the end of the day is something that I hope everybody thinks about, because nobody wants to hurt someone else or wreck their business or their livelihood, even if it does make a statement. It's I think it's important to remember that we all want the same thing,
Yeah, and, I worry too about, change is hard. I look at change in myself as an individual. I got plenty of bad habits and stuff that I'm working on every single day. I've yet to be able to change a behavior overnight. As relatively simple as I think it is. And people are going to die in police custody many more times before, even if we, that path to rebuilding, if we take every appropriate step along the way, it's going to take time. And we're talking about human beings, so therefore, by definition, it's imperfect and flawed. Mistakes are going to be made. And I've been thinking, because people keep asking me about what should I recommend, or what would I recommend in the culture of law enforcement to change, which I've never been a law enforcement officer, so it's tough, but I have a little bit of an understanding of that type of close-knit community. And what actually, the only way that you can describe what happened is, in fact, a murder. And the coroner's reports from both sides of the house, I saw in the paper today, they agree upon that. And, some people are arguing about what was in his system and what wasn't, and it's irrelevant. And
Yeah,
some
it's
people
irrelevant.
and some people will say, well, what happened before the video, and which is also irrelevant because, law enforcement, and I was like you were mentioning with Greg, the conversation I had with Greg, which I found to be fascinating, they have limits to their ability to restrain people, to use restraints once somebody is in handcuffs. And one of the most disturbing aspects about what happened to me is that there were 4 police officers there, and none of them had the wherewithal to recognize that it had gone too far. And it's interesting because they were an incredibly diverse set of officers. They were 4 different ethnicities sitting there. So I'm sure that there could have been, or maybe there was in that department or in law enforcement in general, maybe there is systemic racism. I don't think so, based off of the experience that I have, and I know many law enforcement officers, and I don't know a single one of them that has expressed anything other than disgust for what happened. But yet those 4 officers were right there, and they allowed it to happen, and that is an issue that only law enforcement is going to be able to fix. You hear a lot of people talking about, hey, we need to police law enforcement. And this is where it ties back into being in the SEAL community, because there's bad apples in the SEAL community. There's bad apples in every community because no filtering process is complete. And for a fact, a uniform doesn't speak anything about character or integrity. A lot of the times I find them to be parallel, but often they're divergent. And if I were to line up the entire SEAL community, and we were all in our dress blues, and I just would say to somebody, pick out the bad apples. They can't. But
Sure.
Inside of the SEAL community, reputation is huge. And let me tell you, when it starts to go south, people fucking know your name for the wrong reasons.
Yep.
But the only people that can fix those bad apples are the people that know of the issues. And in the policing world, I'm sure that they're bad apples, but they're the ones who are going to have to bear the burden of policing those problems because they are the ones who have the insight into what is actually causing those things.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done because, what I'd love to say is if you don't step up every time and do the right thing and stop that from happening, then you're a bitch. But
Well,
but you know what? I've been a bitch in my life too.
what's hard though, man, is in that community, I think, and this is no excuse for anything that's happened or is happening, because like you, I know some cops, and they're great people, and they have very, very, very sound intentions. The question that I have, okay, so as someone who lives in a place that I'm typically surrounded by people who mean well and aren't criminals, right? And so when someone enters my space, I'm judging behavior based on my perception of where I'm at in the moment, right? What I try and remember is that especially in cities, a lot of law enforcement ends up in the deep, dark corners of those places, and they are in fear of their lives, and they do have to deal with some pretty bad people, and they do put themselves voluntarily in dangerous situations for the greater good. And so we know as base jumpers, right? And I'm sure you as an operator, when you're with a community of people and you're voluntarily or involuntarily put into position where your life is on the line, and even more importantly, sometimes the people standing next to you, their lives are in danger, it makes for a higher level of connection. Some people call it a fast friendship or whatever, but it's not that. It's
deeper than that. The word friend falls short on so
absolutely
many points.
Absolutely, and you're connected in a way that I would assume. I've heard this. I'm not career military, but I've heard that in wartime, and you can speak to this. People fight not. I mean, obviously, things like the values and their
the
country,
objectives,
right, make a huge impact on what they do and how hard they're fighting for their freedoms, but what they're really doing is fighting for the guy standing next to him. And so I think that when I go base jump with someone and we go through this experience together, and sometimes that experience can be quite intense, that person I'm connected to in a way that I'm not connected to other people. And I think in law enforcement, if they're doing that and they're connected in a way that is represented by the uniform but speaks at a deeper level than a lot of us can understand, when someone does something, they might be less apt to grab them by the collar, even though you think that would make sense to sort of protect the institution. I think that there's this inherent desire to protect people that are like me, and I think that's a root source of the issue, because you have, like you said, the large majority of law enforcement are exceptional people that are really trying to make a positive difference, and yet there are these bad apples, and those bad apples are at a percentage that's unacceptable, because people are like George Floyd are getting killed for being unarmed, and who cares if he was drunk? Who cares if he used a counterfeit bill or whatever it was that caused that issue? The fact of the matter is that there were several officers, and they held him down with their knee on his neck until the guy died. And so, in that situation, it's like, man, if you can't be accountable within your own home, then who are you going to be accountable for? Or if you can't stand up and say, hey man, enough's enough. Like and a lot of cops around the country are doing that, right? But it's interesting to see the human nature and dynamic. You have some areas where cops are dropping their gear and marching with protesters, and in those situations, whether it changes or not, in those moments, the protests are peaceful and there's solidarity, and people are sort of on the same stage, and in places where they're dressed in riot gear and shield checking people or macing them for standing with a fist raised, there's violence and fires,
the outcome is the polar opposite.
It's really it's a bit disturbing.
Well, you brought up a point that it's valid. I wish I could say I have a perfect record for always standing up and doing the right thing. And if you have or work in a community that people look at from the outside with either a view of inspirational or aspirational or exclusivity, there is an essence in the back of your mind is that you don't want to do something or create an issue that would tarnish that. And so there is that aspect for sure. I mean, law enforcement is under and has been under a very high level of scrutiny, which I completely support and agree with. They should be. And I guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee anything, but I bet that they have those same struggles of not wanting to step up or create an issue, because the fear is, by raising an issue and addressing it head on, what's it going to do to our reputation? The long term is it actually would probably make it much, much better, and the gap of trust would decrease instead of increase, and your integrity would rise. Fuck, it's hard.
Yeah.
Because you see yourself in that same uniform.
But people are striving for it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, they are on their knees pleading for honesty and for integrity and for leadership. And,
I think for the vast majority of the time that is present, but we can do better.
Yep.
I refuse to reduce human life down into binary numbers, because I'll see people who are like, hey, let's just talk about the pure stats of how many people. And it's like, I understand that, and it makes a point, but I don't want to reduce the value of human life to that. From a statistical perspective, the vast majority of officers or people in uniform or in those positions, probably wherever they are in the world and the position they hold, are doing well. But that doesn't mean that you cannot continuously strive to do better.
For sure. And that goes on the other side as well. I think the pleads for protests to remain civil and, to show respect for everybody, including law enforcement. I think that's really important too. I think that everybody's has the ability to make a statement right now.
Yeah.
And, things are getting out of hand on both sides. And some people might agree that getting out of hand is what is being required, because, there has been such a blind eye and a deaf ear for so long. And there are certain things that are completely unacceptable, especially, in a country that's built on a constitution that is, its foundations are fairness and respect for the people, right?
Yeah.
And I think, in the long run, like I said before, people just want to be left alone to try and live their lives in a positive way. And, I hope that some of these struggles that are happening in the world right now are going to lead or light up a path that will allow some of those changes to be made, as opposed to, I wouldn't say turning a blind eye to it, or because it's obviously been something that people have been screaming at the top of their lungs for or about for a lot of years. But I think now I see people who maybe would have been silent 10 years ago standing up and saying, nah, enough's enough, like it's time to make some changes.
And I just hope they're as equally committed as to the rebuilding.
Absolutely.
And if they are, I have nothing but support for that.
Yeah.
We can do better, for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
And the route to doing better, and people are like, well, what should we do? I'm like, come on, man. Like,
put your right foot in front of your other, I mean, that's the deal, right? In anything, it's like to look at if I looked at the entire mountain, I'd go home before leaving the parking lot, right? You just got to put your right foot in front of the other and solve these issues.
And there's issues of training, for sure, experience, leadership, like all of it. Like and every one of those, we should strive to do better. And by doing that, right foot in front of the other, like you're saying, to move the needle in the correct direction and not allow it to go in the other direction.
Right.
And encompass the last 20-some minutes we've been talking about this in an Instagram post.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Right. But like you said, what it does boil down to is, like what my old man always says, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And I just think people just need to keep their eyes on a positive horizon and take one step at a time and remember to treat other people the way they want to be treated,
I think there might be an essence to, I think there might have been some pressure in the bottle that added to the situation with George Floyd with the COVID restrictions.
For sure.
I think that the tinderbox was pre-primed with some pressure, because even, I don't know how it was down in Missoula, but people up here were kind of like, hey, you can take your quarantine and go fuck yourself.
For sure. No, I think you're right. I think a lot of this is about civil liberties.
For sure. And so people had been pressed, and then now it's like, nope, that's it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, because a camel would obviously break a piece of straw.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think people have, and I think in some ways the last 8 years have been sort of a struggle relative to constitutional rights, civil liberties. And I think, Greg's conversation with you was a really interesting conversation to listen to because of that. And, when you have restrictions placed on a society based on the pandemic, and then you have, you can see it as a result from curfews. Here we have rioting, we have something has to be done. Okay, well, everybody needs to stay inside after 8 p.m. And if you're found outside, you'll be arrested and fined an exorbitant amount of money. People are like, fuck you.
Especially after 9 weeks of that,
For
9
sure.
weeks of, no gathering in public spaces. We're social creatures, but we don't want you to be social. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I'm not saying that those requests or that guidance was, I would like to believe that they were made with the best of intentions.
For sure.
But it started to pressure people into a corner where I think that they're really taking a look at what it is they're willing to stand for. And that
people are like, wait, well, where do I live?
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And I think, older generations have seen transitionary periods where people had this sort of struggle, certainly in, the time of, the fight for civil rights. But how old are you?
42.
42, yeah.
Let's be clear. That's what it says on my driver's license. That's not the age that I act.
Right, exactly. I always say to my wife, if my body feels like I'm 60 and my brain feels like I'm 16, that makes me just about 45.
Yeah.
But in our lifetimes, I don't remember a time where people's freedoms were as pressed and people were as fed up as they are and as divided as they are. It's pretty interesting,
It's been a slow trickle, I believe, on the freedom aspect. 9/11 was interesting for a variety of reasons, but it also, if you look back at the small and incremental freedoms, which is exactly what they are, that we have willingly surrendered and that we will never get back. And a lot of it, I would say, comes into the space of just privacy, which should still be a freedom as well. But, in our reliance upon electronic devices or abilities for organizations to see you, to track you, to listen to you, it's we've been on an interesting trajectory since that time.
Yeah.
It's startling to look back and, that it's an interesting conversation to have, that, freedom versus security. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it's, it's basically somebody who was willing to give up some of their freedom for the appearance of security deserves neither.
What's interesting is security to me is a word like perfect. It doesn't really exist. I think we'd like it to exist, but I do think that our freedoms and our liberties are extremely important and certainly worth fighting for. And generations have fought for it and died for it, and I think it's important to respect that. And for me, it's extremely important. But I also, I also see bits and pieces of it stripped in, like you said, in increments that are so small they're barely noticeable. But if you
ounces
step
become
back,
pounds
quickly.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's funny. I always joke with my daughter that we're older than Google, and
shit, we are older than Google.
She's like, "What does that even mean?"
Just exactly that.
You mean phones had cords? But
what do you mean you didn't have a phone on you and access to the Library of Congress at all times?
Yeah. What's an encyclopedia? What is that?
Remember when they would deliver the new ones every year?
Yeah. From many a book report, and
I hope they were recycled, because otherwise there's landfills somewhere full of previous year's encyclopedias.
You know what else too? You know how much a typewriter sucks? Have you ever used a typewriter? I mean, I remember obviously typing a lot of stuff as a kid is like this sophisticated way of writing a paper, and man, you get on a typewriter now and it's just like
you almost have to be attempting to like find your Renaissance man roots to go back to a binary typewriter. However, I look back at high school and I think to myself, probably the two most valuable classes that I took would be English and typing.
Yeah.
Because I type all the time.
Right.
Not on a typewriter, of course. Even though I can see the allure of getting one of those and just, going back to the analog days. But yeah, it's
Yeah, pretty interesting. Our world today, and just the connectivity of
everything.
The ability to pick up a phone and face to face talk to somebody in Australia real time. I mean, we used to joke about Star Trek communicators as kids, and
what we have now is way better.
Right. Those were like flip phones, Right.
That was like the Motorola Razr 1. And Well, I mean, if we could get the beam me up, Scotty portion, which I feel like Elon Musk is probably working on that at some
it's
point.
probably close.
Yeah. So I mean, the dude launched a car into space, so he's probably working on that. I think we're going to be okay. It's, I mean, I know we're going to get out of it. I just hope that there's not too much more destruction and hurt along that path. And I truly do hope that people realize it's going to be a sine wave. Like there will be some improvements. I'm sure after this, but stand by because it's it's not going to be a perfect road. You got to be on for the left and the right turns, in my opinion, as well.
Yep. I think honestly, I'm not seeing any need to have any hope for anything less than drama well beyond November.
Yeah, this year might be a write-off.
Yeah. 2019, 2020 have been pretty tumultuous years,
But let's be honest, the meme game has been varsity. I've seen some shit where I literally had to put my phone down and like, oh my God, what Joe posted one the other day. It's this lady bent over, something along the lines of just looking out the window to see which portion of Revelations we're playing out today.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I have friends, all over the world that send me shit all the time, because they see what's going on.
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, it's both hilarious and, a bit embarrassing, but
sometimes you need a little bit of both.
Yeah.
We could, I'm not against the U.S. taking one on the chin. There's a lot of growth that can come from that. I've been pretty embarrassed in some points in my life, and I came back from those stronger because I didn't want to repeat them. So,
yeah. No, I was just about to say that. I mean, I think the largest growth spurts I've ever taken were related to getting my ass handed to me.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, like a friend used to say, depth comes from darkness. It's sometimes that it just is required.
I got asked on, so I started doing Friday episodes because I get unloaded on with people who ask questions, and I love it. So it's like, okay, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes, which I suck at, by the way, because I want to talk for longer. But one of them was 3 things that I think all males should do. And the very first one was fail. The second one was fight. And you need to fight and lose. In a control, I'm like, don't go and get in a street fight. You can do this in a controlled environment with a winning participant. But if you get your ass handed to you, it's a humbling experience, and you can grow from that. Same as failure. If you fall on your face, you learn how to pick yourself up. And you have to have those mechanisms, in my opinion, if you're going to continue your journey as a human being.
For sure.
If you get to that arrival state where it's like, I got this, it's like, I don't want to be around you.
Yeah, no way. I mean,
how many times have you seen that in the base jumping world where the guy's just so laissez-faire because they're just like, I've done this so many times. I'm like, I am going over here because I don't need 100%. To hear you Morse code down this fucking cliff face.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Yeah.
And that type of energy, I've gotten to a place in my life where I can't even, I choose to not be around it. And it's one of those deals. It's like, it started out as being so affected that I would emotionally divest, a bit and only be with people that I really trusted. And then it became an intolerance. And now it's just, almost a bit of reactive protection just based on the fact that after a long time of dealing with it, I start to, I don't know about you, but I start to feel like, a train that hit a wall and I got 50 cars behind me that are coming at speed, And,
yeah, with mass.
Yeah. So, just, the necessity to have some quiet time and be on my own and do things for my reasons and not be influenced by others, especially if the influence is that. It's super important for me, and a lot of times, if I feel something different, I'll either, go somewhere else or walk down and
you'll socially distance.
Yeah, exactly.
It's I found as I get older, my circle of people that I really want to spend time with has gotten smaller and smaller.
For sure.
It's probably, it might be an inch wide, but it's a mile deep, and I would prefer that over a mile wide and an inch deep.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And I've come to the place where it's the same thing. You verbalized it, I think, better than I could, but just that recognition of that type of attitude, I can't be around it. Mostly because I don't want to deal with, I know what the aftermath is likely going to be, and I just don't want to deal with that.
Well, what I sort of realized was that, let's use flying of various types, just because it's been probably that and climbing have been 2 of the most dominant features of my life. So after 30 years of flying or close to it, I've seen enough accidents and had enough close calls myself, or even potential accidents where I recognize patterns, right? We as humans recognize patterns in nature. And now, after, this many years, I can see a pattern and smell it from a mile away. And so when I see someone behaving a particular way, even if they're good people and they have good intentions, I'm, if there's someone I care about, and even if they're not, sometimes I'll very carefully and constructively, poke them with the stick a little bit. Say like, hey man, one time this is what I did, and this was the outcome, and this is what I learned from it, and take it or leave it, right?
Yeah.
And then, I see people doing something that is, or continuing that same path, or they're doing it in a louder way, and you just, you want to grab
even though
them.
they've been warned probably by a variety of people.
Totally. And you want to grab them by the collar and just be like, hey, dipshit, you're going to fucking die if you keep doing this.
Isn't it amazing, though, how they won't listen?
Yeah, I mean, you want to say you're no better. Like, people that are better than you and better than me, we're doing that.
One died there's where it's, and it doesn't stop them. It almost drives them in the other direction.
And then you get to a place where you're just like, you smell it, and you're just like, I'm going this way. Fuck it. Fuck them.
It's time for a cappuccino and a strudel.
Yeah, and it's hard because, I do get really, interesting, cool people that will reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be here or there. You want to go do this together? And my nature is, that would be great, because some of the best aspects of what the path I've chosen, or the things that I get to do, is to connect with people and to gain perspective because of it, and some of the deepest friendships I've ever made have come from those activities. So I always look at it as a lucky thing. But then there's also a part of me now that is, a bit sort of gun shy and wants to say, man, I'd really love to do that, but I actually don't know you, and I don't trust people that I don't know, and I really don't want to see you die in front of me, and I don't want to
Let's not make our first interaction in the middle of a pressurized cylinder.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe we could just. I'm in the same way.
Like a friend would say, hey, let's go do a route in the Himalayas, and I'm like, hey man, why don't you just come over and we'll go clip some bolts in the backyard,
or maybe we'll go for a hike first.
Yeah, exactly. Like let's have a coffee, how about that? And
the time to find the depth of somebody's soul and character is not when both of your lives are riding on the line.
Right.
Because it's my theory that if I go somewhere with somebody, I'm responsible for also getting that person out. I'm in for the journey.
Of course.
But there's a lot of people who are not like that.
Yeah, well.
And that comes from my old job, though, too. It's like, listen, everybody comes back, like, period. And
Absolutely.
If things go to shit, then guess what? We're all going to get covered in shit, but we're all coming back together. And I take the same theory. I'm very selective of who I will specifically base jump with. I mean, I haven't base jumped in a while, actually. My thought process on that whole thing is shifted. I still have the exact same desire to do it. I just need to find the right place to do it for me.
No, for sure. But I do think that general sense of self-reliance and responsibility for the decisions that we make, especially voluntarily.
Yeah.
I think that's a cornerstone of the decision to do it in a responsible way. And so, like you, if I go to the Himalayas to do a new route with a partner, and we're, up on some peak 7-10 days from any help, it's obvious the only person that's going to help my partner is me, and the only person that's going to help me is my partner, and we have to behave that way. We have to change our our methods of making decisions with that responsibly in mind, and when it comes to that sense of responsibility, nobody's left behind. Sometimes we end up in situations where we just have to step up and do what's necessary. And when you've been there, you start being pretty careful about what positions you start putting yourself into voluntarily,
And I think that's where that bond comes from. It almost feels like not that it's possible, but like a DNA merging with the people that you're willing to, because it's more than trust. It's deeper than friendship, for sure. There's I don't know how to describe the connection, but
yeah, here's it's a bit of a story on
fire away. We still got 40 hours left on the card.
I might just barely fit it in.
Perfect.
No, it's funny. It's not really a story I've ever told, but several people were there and know about it. But it's very relative to what we're talking about. So I was about to, I got asked from a buddy to jump on his sailboat. Never had any sailing experience, but to sail from Cape Town to northern Brazil. So it's going to be.
I already enjoy this story.
Yeah, this is going to be a
Do
pretty.
you know how to swim?
I do know how to swim. Yeah, but I didn't want to swim.
Yes.
You know, let's make that clear.
Nobody does when they're on a boat. But some people would start that
Right.
story with, so I don't know how to swim, but I did a journey on a vessel.
Yeah. So, you know, it ended up being 33 days at sea, but that's the sub story. So I was literally about to leave on a trip with no guaranteed ending. You know, it was one of those trips where I bought a one-way ticket to South Africa and told my family that I'd be back when I was, because I wasn't sure how long this was going to take. And 5 days before that trip, you know, we've been sort of building up to it. I get a call from a friend of ours, and he, one of his best friends in life, a guy that he base jumped with a lot, had gotten out of a helicopter and didn't make a corner and ended up impacting high on a tower in
This was in Arizona, wasn't it?
Arizona.
Yeah, I know you're talking about.
And he pinballed and got his remains stuck in a crack high off the ground. It was probably 750 or 800 feet off the ground and 400 feet from the top of the tower. And the top of the tower wasn't much bigger than the top of this table. So because the rock was garbage, I mean, you could carve your initials in the rock with your thumbnail. The search and rescue guys, you know, rightfully so, decided that they wouldn't risk the 5 or 6 guys that it would take to pull off getting his body back.
Might have been past their capabilities as well, which is a smart call for them to recognize.
For sure. And the amount of people that it would have taken would have
Yeah.
put, in terms of objective hazard, it was unacceptable. In
Yep.
any organization, it would
Wasn't
be
the
unacceptable.
weather also a little shady too?
It was actually okay. The weather was
Okay.
okay, but it was cold and it was winter, so there was quite a bit of snow on this tower, you know, which is not normal for the desert.
Yep.
So, you know, my friend calls me up 5 days before the sailing trip and says, you know, hey man, you know, our buddy Matt's up there and his mom needs to have him home, you know, needs to get him back. And search and rescue won't go get him, and we don't know what to do. Can you come down, you know? And I remember thinking, man, if I'm going to go up there, I don't want anybody with me except for maybe 1 or 2 people. And who comes to mind is Ammon, because Ammon McNeely happens to be a complete wild man. He's, you know, loose as fuck, but he's a good climber and he's really experienced walling, big walling in particular, you know. So I said, you know, I'd go up there, but if Ammon was involved. And he said, that's funny because I just called Ammon. Ammon's on board, and he said he would do it if you came, you know. So
That's how you know you have the correct crew.
yeah, well, so I talked to my wife, and she said, you know, I really don't want you to go, but you need to go. You know, you should go do this. So I fly down to Salt Lake. Ammon picks me up. We drive down there. We arrive at 5 p.m. 5 minutes later, we're in a 44 hovering over the tower and looking down and seeing where he's at, you know,
Yeah.
what we're into. And, you know, next morning before light, our pilot hot loads us one at a time. I get dropped off on top first. And I remember, you know, he's got one skid on the top of the tower hovering, and he's like, you know, concentrating to keep it on the point. And he's like, okay, I got it, get out. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, get out now. You know, I'm like, okay.
Don't take too long.
Right.
Don't dally.
So I hop out of the door and lay down, you know, and he peels off. And I kind of solo down maybe 8 feet or something onto this ledge and build an anchor and, you know, tie an 8 on a bite and throw it up on top for Ammon. And he comes up with the gear and gets hot loaded next. And, you know, I led the rappels, and, you know, it was like old school, man. The rock was so bad you couldn't drill bolts. So I was drilling holes and pounding baby angles, you know, making warthogs to get us down this thing because the rock was just garbage. Trying to peel off big, you know, blocks and make sure that we were both safe on the way down.
Yeah. How many pitches did you guys have to rappel down?
So 4 to get to his body.
Fuck.
And then, you know, I wrap down there and finally get to him. And, yeah, Ammon comes down. We sat for maybe 45 minutes and talked about life as you do, you know.
Yeah.
He'd been up there for 7 days, and neither one of us were ready at that point to deal with
what
the
you're
work.
about to literally walk into, yeah.
And, you know, at some point you just have to, like, all right, it's time to sack up and get this done, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's terrible. But we put him, you know, untwisted him, put him in a body bag, got him out of the crack, had to work it a couple of different ways to get him actually into a haul bag, and then built a 5-to-1 and hauled him, I don't know, maybe 40 feet, and then I let out this like ledge system for 250 feet or something. We built a drum tight Tyrolean, and I hauled him across with a 6-to-1, and Ammon kind of walked him across to make sure we weren't knocking too much shit down. And then we wrapped another, it must have been 8 or 10 pitches, and when we're rappelling, the 44 is hovering like 100 feet off the wall, and his mom and his girlfriend are in there, and they're bawling, and this is like a pretty intense feeling to be hanging on anchors with his 200-pound body and all of our
he was
whole,
a big boy.
Yeah, a whole wall rack, and then the two of us on shitty warthogs and backed up with like stoppers and loose flakes, and
I might have advised them to have the girlfriend and mom maybe not.
We had nothing to say about it at that point.
I mean,
we were
even
like,
as the pilot, like let us bring your son back to you.
Well, and so yeah, and so after some scary moments, and like I said, I was leading the rappel, so I was like pulling off big blocks, and we had 4 guys on the ground that were there kind of as emotional and physical support. Once we got him to the ground, it was last light, and the SAR guys were in there with a long line and a big cargo net, and I walk over to the cargo net, and this guy behind the helmet and goggles is like, Jeff, we got to stop meeting this way. And it's the same dude that was on the helicopter crew, the Grand Canyon crew, that got Stanley's body out of Zion when I was there,
Yeah.
And so we put the haul bag in the long line, and 10 minutes later, they're yanking him and the rescue worker out of the canyon, and it's too dark to fly. Well, our chopper pilot's down in the canyon saying, hey, you guys hurry up if you want to ride out. And Hammond and I were, we're pretty exhausted, so we're like, fuck it, we'll walk out.
You've had a physical and emotional day.
Yeah,
at that point.
It's not been an ideal day.
Yeah.
And yet, I'll finish with it, but we walked out, and it was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 miles, and there was 13 or 14 creek crossings, and we just were taking our time, and looking at him, and he looking at me. We had a different level of connection, right?
Yep.
At that point. And we get out and we get back to the hotel room, and it's 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and a lot of friends and family had gathered, and it felt really good to tell his mom, like, it's okay to say goodbye to him. Like, I've seen him. It's okay. You can, you should.
Yeah.
In the end, it was this terrible experience that was also one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, and something that I wouldn't trade for anything. And it has to do with what brought this story out. It's this sense of responsibility to, relative to the decisions that I make. When I make a decision to go base jump, I'm recognizing and a lot of people don't, because they haven't had that experience, but I recognize the position I'm potentially putting other people into before I make that decision. And if I make it, it's definitely taking that into consideration, and because I do that, it was really important to me, almost at a cellular level, to be involved in that and to help if I could, and so in a large sense, it was a statement about, almost a justification for the decisions that I've made in my life, and how those decisions affect me positively. They fulfill me as a human being and make me a better person to my daughter and to my wife and to my friends, and to see the world with, a greater level of empathy, but also to understand, to truly and on a visceral level understand the consequences of my decisions.
They have gravity, and sometimes you have to shoulder that.
Yeah, and also bringing a friend home to his folks, and allowing closure.
I can't imagine how powerful that was for them, or how terrible it must have been before you were able to do that. Wondering whether or not
Absolutely.
It's.
So for that, I feel really lucky, super lucky. Really
I can't think of
fortunate.
anything more powerful you could have done for them. Other than him obviously being alive, that's probably the next powerful thing you could do, is at least give them closure and return his body to those that love him the most.
Yeah, and the people that were involved in that episode or that experience I'll be connected to them forever. And a lot of those people I honestly, at a intimate level, don't know at all.
Yeah.
But I sure feel a huge sense of being connected to them in a pretty profound way, So yeah, I mean, I think self-responsibility and also self-reliance can be connected to community. I guess that's, potentially one of the reasons why it's an attractive thing to do, or these communities that we belong to affect us in a way that I think has value.
I agree. I only jumped with Matt one time and had a great experience with him. It was in Switzerland, my second trip there, and the most animated, energetic human being known to man, who we both know to be Miles Dasher, who, by the way, needs fucking 0 ounces of Red Bull and is sponsored by Red Bull. And if you're ever with Miles, please throttle his intake because...
But it's not just energy. It's positive energy.
It is, and it's uncontrollable as it is. He doesn't need a sugary energy drink to go on top of that. Love the guy. I have to have him on as a guest at some point. I mean, he taught me to base jump. He shepherded me through.
He's an amazing human being.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time to link up. But we were there, and, we had been... It was really cool with Miles because he taught me on the bridge, and then he took me to Italy for my first jump off of Monte Brento, which I like to call skydive Monte Brento because you're so high up that you're like, this isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculously overhanging. I might actually mess this up and still be okay.
Yeah, you can fall off that thing.
God, you could probably fall off that thing partially zipped up in your suit, which is not what I'm recommending anybody do, but you might be okay. And so went from there, and then took me into the valley. I remember the first time just seeing that opening of the Lauterbrunnen Valley. I'm like, are you...
It's like Rivendell there.
I mean, it's like being, I would imagine, a diabetic in a candy store.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, all of these are available. So we started off on the Yellow Ocean for the first jumps.
Yeah.
And then to the low moose, Le Moose, which I believe is Spanish for the moose. But
imagine that.
I do believe, I'm not an total idiot, people. I understand that it means the moss in French, correct? Because I think somebody slipped on that moss and tumbled to their death. Yeah. Which is not a good look or probably a very fun experience. But then, we went over to the Via Ferrata, and he slowly just kind of
took you through the paces.
Took me through the paces on my first trip. We went back, and same guy who called you was actually there on this particular jump, and they were going to show us the high moose, which, I can't speak to how it is it's treated in the modern day because I haven't been over there in a few years. But the exit is a little spicier. It's shorter.
Highland Moose is real.
Highland Moose is real for sure. And I guess we'd have to unpack a little bit what we mean by this start. So Monte Brento is massively overhung. I think that's fair to say. So if you were to drop a rock straight off the edge of it, it would actually, the mountain is, or the cliff face is going away from it. So if you were tumbling or unstable, your likelihood of encountering what you just jumped off of for at least a little bit is lower. Okay. Then you have Yellow Ocean, which is sheer. So you don't want to go anywhere back into the rock. You have everything in front of you, but you do not want to be, going in the wrong direction. And then you have jumps that have a short vertical, or maybe even, I would say, a very slight positive, and then the terrain kicks up. And it's the jump, this is the way I describe base jumping. The jump is always optional. The performance of everything you do afterwards is mandatory. Right. So on the starts, and I don't even remember anymore what would be considered, probably a over 8-second romp drop. But if you start creeping it into, 6 seconds or 5 seconds or 4 seconds, you're looking down on the edge, and it's visually different for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I remember standing on the high moose the first time, and it's, of course, this rickety rope. And you're like slightly halfway zipped up in your straitjacket and getting to this tree, and then the next person is stacked behind you and behind you. And it was Scotty, Miles, me, Matt. And
that's a good crew.
It was a great crew. It was my first time there, and I was like, I will not be going first. I was like, Scotty, you're pretty good at this. How about you demonstrate the proper exit and flight path? So he went, and then Miles went, and so I get up and I get all my stuff on, and Matt's just sitting there smiling his ass off. And the sun was, it was later in the afternoon, and we had, limited amount of light. I mean, we were in no risk of being out of light. Never tried to rush me at all. It was just like, hey, man, you got this, laugh and high five. And just the last memory I have of him is this shit-eating grin. And I turned around and tried to give him like my zipped-up wing high five, bombed off, had a good exit, made the right-hand turn, landed in the field, went over to the Horner, and we had beers. And that was my last experience with him, and I'm glad that I had it.
Yeah.
Because I had heard about what happened, and who he was with, and I know the impact that it had.
My last experience with Matt was in Arizona at that spot. Yeah, we had done a bunch of jumps. You know, our friend has a helicopter that would drop us off at the base, and we would, or at the cliff rim, and we would jump back in, and basically free rides to the top, and
the lift is always better than the hike.
Especially there.
Like, I enjoy split boarding, but also enjoy getting on the chairlift.
Right.
You know, which is essentially what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. There's not a whole lot of higher value than a buddy with a helicopter.
Oh God.
But we I was actually jumping a new suit and wasn't super comfortable flying, you know, hard lines with it, and so I was being a little more conservative, and there was a bit of talk of some guys doing a flyby and maybe getting some footage of it. So I volunteered to go and stand on a point down low and get some footage. And Matt was just like, "I'm going with you," you know. And you know, obviously he was flying pretty well and
hard. I mean, he was
real comfortable and pushing
it
it hard. But he came just to share time, you know. And we had some really good conversation over the couple of hours and camped out there for a few days. But that was kind of, you know, I mean, I had known him and traveled in the same circles, but that was kind of when we sort of solidified a friendship, was there. And, you know, to have that experience later there, you know, I wouldn't call it irony, but, you know, it was interesting to
ironic for sure. But
to be there, you know, it didn't, I was going to say the irony didn't pass over me, you know, but you know, I think we all have to go through it, and none of us are making it out of this alive. And Matt lived his life in a way that was really true to himself. Yeah. And he brought a lot of joy to a lot of people, you know. And I always say that, like, the reason why it stings so bad when we lose our homies is because they made such a positive impact on our lives. I was so influenced by that person that it stings pretty bad when they lose the game, you know. Yeah. And you know, getting to that place sooner than later, I think, is a good recipe to remember them in the way that I'm sure would honor the impact they made more than being in a bad place for a long time about it. You know, even though I would give anything to have it not have happened or whatever.
They wouldn't want you to be in a bad place either.
No, of course not. Yeah. So,
how did you get into base jumping? I mean, I assume skydiving was first.
Yeah, but skydiving was a means to an end. I was never attracted to skydiving. I got into base jumping. So I was racing hang gliders.
We should go back, because skydiving and base jumping are one of your many hobbies.
Yeah, well, and later hobbies, actually. So I learned how to climb and got really passionate about climbing in the mountains when I was young, 14.
Where did you grow up?
In north of Seattle.
Okay.
And I would, like, you know, my buddy and I would, like, hitch rides or try and, you know, talk people's older brothers into bringing us up to this local climbing area called Mount Index.
Was it something from your family that got you that? Or?
No. Man, I think I've always been kind of attracted to these environments that require work and suffering, you know? Like, I remember sort of romanticizing Himalayan expeditions and seeing pictures in National Geographic of, you know, people in Tibet, and just like thinking, God, you know, it's kind of like that explorer, you know. In our lifetimes, exploration isn't the same as it was in the past. I mean, I guess it is, just in a different form, right?
We still have explorers. I'd say they're exploring in a different way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that those environments that require a skill set, it requires work to earn the right to be there, and to be in these very wild places that included, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it, you know, that I wasn't attracted to the risk. Yeah. And to the simplicity of a situation where, you know, you either do or you do not. You know, there isn't, like, it's like base jumping. You either do, you know, people say, oh, I want to try base jumping. He's like, no, you don't try base jumping. You either base jump or you don't base jump, you know? Yeah. And so I think those kinds of things were always attractive. But I got attracted to climbing, rock climbing in particular, because it was something that none of my friends did. You know, it was this unique thing that that wasn't soccer or football or any of these other things.
Well, traditional in air quotes sports.
and I really did enjoy being humbled, being scared. You know, I liked being in a situation that was extremely uncomfortable. I like that feeling of vulnerability, and the more pointed the way I feel afterwards, like after I either do it or don't do it,
Yep.
And so I got into rock climbing at a young age, and then that developed into ice climbing and into just a love for the mountains and the desire to want to use that as a vehicle to see the world. And when I was testing some gear or, trying out some gear, a friend of mine was designing portaledges and harnesses and packs, and I went to go pick up a portaledge at his shop and saw a bunch of photos of him around his shop flying hang gliders, and I was just like, holy shit, I want to run off a mountain with a fucking set of wings. Are you kidding me? Like, as a stupid 17-year-old kid, I was like, yeah,
I was put here for this.
Yeah, sign me the fuck up. I am, and he was like, yeah, whatever, kid, this is not.
You don't even know,
right,
kid.
Right. But he was a cool dude, and he did end up, after he knew I was really serious about it and committed to it, he fucking drove me up the mountains every day for 90 days in a row, like all summer long. Every day we went not just to one site, but sometimes 3 sites, and I was flying this shit show glider. This it was like an old beach trainer. And I think it was a Flight Designs 205. It was built in 1978, had duct tape on the fucking sidewires. I mean, this thing was a horror show now I know this, but at the time it was like my first set of wings,
Yeah.
So anyways.
How does one learn how to hang glide?
Well, you start off on a hill and you...
Like a shallow grade?
Yeah.
Okay,
so since I've taught a lot of people how to fly, right? And the way I teach people how to fly and the way I learned how to fly are two different sports.
Well, we have to hear both, of course.
Well, so let's put it this way. My instructor, my first day on the training hill, we walked, normally you would start in the flat ground and you would learn how to set it up and run it, run the glider and control the angle of attack and understand what twist, sweep, and reflex do and how to control in a weight shift environment.
All of this makes sense
or a weight shift vehicle. Yeah, how to control the wing to make sure that it's going to fly off the hill at an airspeed that enables the pilot to control the vehicle, right?
As opposed to a stall where the vehicle is controlling the pilot.
So my first lesson, my instructor, who wasn't really an instructor but a really rad dude, and taught me a lot about life too. He took me to this hill. We walked halfway up the hill together. It's a 150-foot hill. And he sits down and starts rolling a doobie, and he's like, all right, this is what he said, literally. All right, kid, let's see what you can do with that thing. And so I walk up to the top of the hill, and, immediately, I've read the book, right? I've seen the pictures.
How hard could it be?
How hard could it be? So I run off the hill, immediately go into flight. I go prone, which is like not what you do, and fly it to the bottom and realize that I had the launch part, but landing was the next step, right? And as you know, when things are new and they're going fast, sometimes there's a bit of sensory overload where the part of your brain that's generating memories doesn't work, right? So I immediately hit the ground, still prone, broke both down tubes, and he comes down kind of laughing, and he's like, all right, now we can start, So we go back to his shop, we replace the down tubes, we go back to the training hill. I proceed to do 6 or 7 more launches, and he says, all right, come back first thing in the morning. So I come back, we do another 5 or 6, maybe until 10:30 in the morning, one of which I ended up stalling the glider and diving into a thicket of blackberry bushes right in the fucking middle of it. So now, I'm pulling my glider out, trying to not rip the sail, and I'm covered in thorns and scratched all over. And then, 10:30 comes along and it's starting to get active, sunny. And he says, all right, man, I think you're ready.
Oh God.
So we drive to the hill.
I love this story, by the way.
we and I'm like, this is great. I'm 17. I can do anything, right? So he drives me to this mountain. Blanchard overlooks Chuckanut Drive. It's a very beautiful site. And it's, 1,200 feet off the ground. And I'm flying a 1970s technology with a knee hanger harness and no parachute and a bike helmet. And he's like, yeah, you got it.
Full send or no send, Jeff?
Yeah, well, apparently. I don't remember any of it, except I do remember when I landed, this dude runs over and he gives me a beer. And he's like, that was obviously your first flight. So here you go. And that was kind of the beginning of that story. And it answered a question that I'd been, wondering about my whole life. So I didn't want to do anything other than that. I was still climbing, but I was just, like completely over the top fascinated by this new thing called hang gliding. And must have been in 2006, I pulled a tendon climbing and decided that because I was so passionate about flying, and obviously things had evolved quite a bit, I would try competing. And so I was racing hang gliders and found enough success in that I was supported to race the glider around the world, you know, and it became this really amazing vehicle to see the world. I would go to my first trip to the south of France, you know, I would be in the Pre-Worlds, which is a big international competition. 150 people from all over the world show up. We race our hang gliders 100-mile box through the Haute Alps, and you know, if you don't make goal, you land in some alpine village, and you're, you know, brought into the house of folks that you don't speak the same language, and you have dinner with them, and those experiences you don't have if you don't, you know, it's a really interesting way to see a country for the first time, right? And so I was racing hang gliders, and was a factory pilot for a company called Will's Wing. They're like the largest hang gliding manufacturer in the world. They happen to be in California, and test flying gliders, and just loving that life, and still climbing quite a bit. But I became friends with Dean Potter.
Yep.
And we were at a trade show.
Through climbing, I'm assuming, because he wasn't a
through climbing.
hang glider.
No,
okay.
through climbing. And we were at a trade show, which we both, you know, loathe.
Yeah.
And he was with Wispy, you know, and I saw him, and, hey, what's up, man? We go over to the side and sit down in a dark corner and just on the floor and just start talking about, you know, we're just talking shit, right? Every once in a while, a group would come over and, you know, ask Dean to stand up and take a picture with him or whatever, and then we'd get back to talking about whatever.
Standard trade show fare. I do the exact same thing at the SHOT Show.
Right. And so he said, because he was fascinated by hang gliding. He wanted to learn how to hang glide.
Really?
Yeah. And he just wanted to fly. He was just had that in his soul, you know. He just wanted to fly.
Was he jumping at this point?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
Wingsuit base jumping, and he said, "Man, you know, you should think about this." And I was like, you know, I'm into flying, man. I'm not really into falling, you know. And he's like, no, you know, I think you would enjoy it being a climber. It's pretty fun to run off stuff like El Cap, you know.
Yeah. Which is totally legal, by the way.
Yeah. Well, first light, last light in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I'm not giving any advice.
Right,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, it may or may not have been the most significant thing I've ever done in my life. But he sort of knew that I would really be into this, you know.
Yeah.
And I sort of dismissed it, and with as much respect as I have for him. Yeah. I just didn't feel like it was for me. And then I'll never forget it, man. I was in the living room with my wife, and we watched that documentary about he went and climbed a new route on Mount Butte in Canada, and they built this fucking totally contrived plank that was off the top of this thing because he got up, he did this really beautiful route, but it was too positive to jump. He couldn't find an exit.
Oh yeah.
So they build this massive ramp, and the footage, it's like Cineflex footage. You know, you can tell Cineflex is like pretty wild footage. He jumps off this thing in a big suit, and I saw him fly. He had like a 3.5 minute flight, you know? And, you know, like we were talking about before, when you have a profound experience and you're living in the present in such a profound way that time doesn't even exist, 3.5 minutes might sound to your audience like a short amount of time. It's a fucking lifetime, right? Like 3.5 minutes in a wingsuit feels like
and
a 10-hour cross-country flight in a hang glider.
You can't even describe the number of things that go through your mind.
Right. Like, every second you are present for, you know? And so, and
by the way, 3.5 minutes from a base jump is
ridiculous.
That's like Iger type shit right there.
That's it. And it's a big jump. I think it's a 10,000 foot jump or something.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So, or I could be wrong about that, but it seemed like a long time. I got the memory of a goldfish, but it seemed like a long time, right? And so I saw that footage, and I just picked up the phone, called him, and I was like, all right, man, I get it. All right. Like, you got me, you know? And he was like, I remember him saying, like, dude, okay, if you're serious about this, I'll help you in every way, but you have to do what I say. And if you don't, I don't want any part of it, because I really don't want to have another friend that goes in, you know, basically. And I was like, you know, like, man, I started to say, man, you know, you don't know me that well, but I'm telling you. And he was like, no, I get it. I know you're not. I have to say that, you know?
Yeah.
And I appreciated that. so I ended up learning how to skydive. Same guy that taught Dean. I went down to Lodi, went through
Fucking Lodi.
AFF with Ed Pulowski, who was awesome. You know, his AFF was great, and you know, like he put Alex Honnold through AFF. There's a bunch of people that went through Ed, and you know, Ed is Ed. But I was really grateful for that level of instruction, and it was a great experience. And then, you know, as Lodi goes, it's like the loosest place on the planet. Load number 8 or 9, you know, which like fresh AFF, not even A license. I'm getting on the plane with a 20 way without any clothes on, you know. I mean, it was like one of those things, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with some drop zone operations that are like that. They're like, you're good, right, on paper?
Yeah.
Get on the plane.
So it was a really fast and good education. Spent 4 months just, you know, jumping. You know, I did 250 jumps or something in 3.5 months, and then
which is actually, for people listening, they're like, oh, that's not many. That's most people in 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, it's jumping 7 to 10 times a day every day for, you know, 2 to 3 week trips at a time, and was loving it. But also it was this education that I needed to get to the point where I wanted to be, which was in the end to fly in the mountains. You know, that was what fascinated me. It wasn't getting out of a plane or anything like that. It was hiking or climbing into the mountains and jumping off a cliff and flying with my arms.
Yeah.
In the way that I always dreamed that flight would be.
I'd have to imagine the canopy stuff was relatively straightforward for you with your I mean, a wing is a wing. That's a super broad thing to say, but
no, it's true.
Terminology and characteristic wise, I mean, they share some similarities.
Certainly. And yeah, so that's how I got into it. And then, you know, in Montana.
Well, where'd you learn to base jump?
So a friend of mine, Jordan Kilgore, who's also a ninja, you know, he's like I think he's kind of, I mean, I don't know if I should say this legally, but he's kind of a building guy, you know, but he's aerials and buildings, and
nobody owns the air, man.
Right.
Sometimes it might be trespassing to get to the exit point, but nobody owns the air.
Only if you get caught. But he had an interesting background, and we became pretty fast friends, and he taught me the ins and outs of how to base jump safely. Took me to the bridge, did a bunch of bridge loads.
The Prine? Okay, because I've heard some people who learned up in, what is it, Auburn?
Auburn, yeah. And I also became part of that crew. You know, the Asylum guys. Marty is like a brother. You know, I really love that dude a lot. But yeah, I learned at the Prine, did, you know, a bunch of jumps there, and then came back to Montana, and my first cliff was this, you know, it was a new exit. No one had jumped. It was this big cliff in Montana with a landing zone that leaves a lot to be desired. You know, it's about the size of your living room, surrounded by trees and rocks and creek. And, you know, you had to stick it. And I remember, you know, even after all the climbing and all the flying, my mind was saying, yeah, you've trained to do this. You've triple checked your gear. Everything's going to work. And my body was like, no, don't do that. You don't want to fucking run and jump off that cliff. That's like death on a stick, you know? And I remember that struggle. And Jordan looked at me and smiled, and he's like, remember this, you only get the first time once, you know? And that was kind of like, I mean, the bridge is cool, but to me, it didn't feel like that was my first base jump, you know, real base jump. And then, I did quite a few base jumps in the backcountry in Montana, and the landing zones are
it's not a drop, it's not a DZ.
Man, we don't have a lack of things to jump off of, but the landing zones are all real, you know, and it's not the place to learn.
Crazy when you see that too. You're like, oh my God, I would love to jump that, but there's no feasible place to put your feet down.
And when you're motivated, you do anyways, and you squeeze it between branches and you stick it in between rocks, and you're like, that was awesome, you know? But
until you get a gust of wind, and then it's not.
And then it's not, right?
Trying to figure out how to get out of the backcountry with a compound femur.
Well, and so, you know, I got to the point where I was ready to do my first wingsuit jump. I'd done a bunch of wingsuit skydives, quite a few actually. I did another 250 skydives, and then went to Eloy over a winter and jumped a block of 50 off plus another 10 or something, and did some balloon loads. And this was like purposeful a week before my first trip to Switzerland. And I went to Lauterbrunnen. And, you know, we waded through thigh-deep snow to get to the exits. But I went there. I was going to go with Dean. Dean got really sick. So I ended up going with some other friends, Marshall and a guy named Rami.
Yeah. You're talking Marshall Miller?
Yeah.
I love Marshall.
Marshall's awesome. And what's crazy is when Dean got sick, he had to pull out of the trip like 5 days before I was leaving. And I just happened to be talking to Marshall about some Cavu stuff. And he was like, he's like, you are not going by yourself, and so he contacted Rami, who said, yeah, no, I'll jump with him. And then he's like, I'll call you back in 5 minutes. And 5 minutes later, he calls me and he's like, all right, I'm going with you. I bought a ticket. And,
Hell yeah.
like a brother,
Yep.
he was there for me. And we went and we did my first wingsuit jumps and jumped our asses off and had a great time. And then I came home and I jumped my ass off. Like I was jumping wingsuits in Montana by myself 3 to 7 times a week. And going out there, it's hard to describe as because I know you've experienced it. When you wake up before light by yourself and you grab a cup of coffee and you drive an hour to a parking lot and you turn the radio and the heat of the car off and you get out and you shoulder your base rig and your wingsuit and it's dark and it's quiet and you're by yourself and there's no motivation other than your own and there's no excuses and there's no reasons other than your own. And you hike up into lion country sometimes I'd ride a mountain bike for 4 miles and then hike another 2.5 hours up to an exit that only I'd ever been to.
The one above the lake?
Yeah. Well, now several people have jumped it with me, but that was a new one, right?
Bitches.
I'll tell you, I'd love to go there.
I'll go. I'm in.
And then, you're on the exit by yourself and there's no one saying whether you should or shouldn't. And there's no reason other than the one that you come up with yourself. And then, you jump this thing and you have this really amazing experience. And then you land and you feel like you feel so insignificant. It's like such a small part of something so much bigger. I've said this before. It's like the wind and the grass and the creek and all that shit would be exactly the way it is, whether you were alive or dead there or not, which is a cool experience to have. It's really, and then you jump in, you trail run back out and eat berries and, it's like this amazing thing. Everything's greener, everything is brighter, everything,
It's so hard to describe that, the vividness of the
it's
post.
like visceral, right? And then you get in your car and you drive back and you stop for gas and you walk in and, the person behind the counter is like, hey, honey, how's your morning going? And you're like,
Fucking
pretty
better than yours.
goddamn good. And, they don't know. And you just had this amazing thing. And those years are really special for me. I don't jump like that anymore and haven't for a while, but those, 5 or 6 years when I was going hard and by myself were like really, really special.
It is so different being by yourself too. Really good buddy of mine, Alex, who passed away a few years ago, wingsuit base jumping. We had shared a ton of experiences.
Which Alex?
Sonnenberg.
Oh, okay.
It was in France. The whole story is just,
I was there with Alex Duncan.
Yeah.
So I didn't know.
Yeah.
He died.
But we had worked together peripherally, so we knew each other in the military, and he had gotten out and gone to like the Wharton School of Business. Crazy trajectory. And he had just started a new job as the CEO of an oil and gas company, was over in France for his new wife's sister's wedding, snuck off to get a jump in. So that story ended in just tragedy, but so many awesome experiences. And we would just hike. Like one of the jumps we would do almost every morning, we'd get up early and we'd go hike to the Low Jungfrau.
Oh, yeah.
Because, Miles showed us where it was, and that fucking hike sucks.
It does, but it's awesome too.
It is awesome, right? But you start in the woods, and then you hit the grass, and then you make that left, and you come all the way around underneath the face. You're going to jump, and you can see the field of joy as you go up to the chains. And so we would hike that, and then I stayed on that trip a few days after he had left, and I stayed on the same routine though, and I would do that hike in the morning, and it was such a different experience hiking by myself because my phone alarm would go off.
Yeah.
I got to get the train down the hill to get to the bus, to get to the edge of the trailhead. Nobody's telling me to do that. Hiking was different. And then it's easier, in my opinion, it's easier to jump when there's other people around, obviously. There's kind of the herd mentality, and the conversations you have are different. It's like, well, fuck it, he's going to go too. So, all right, I feel better. I'm not the only idiot up here making this choice, so how wrong can we all be?
Right.
And sometimes the answer is we're all wrong. But
yeah, oftentimes.
Yeah. But just so different. And even just the jock up, how we would banter back and forth, or just being there quietly and sitting there and just kind of absorbing everything that was going on. And then, step into the edge. And when I would do those jumps, it was like, leave the GoPros at the hotel. Just to be there for, why do I actually want to do this? Am I doing this for the right reasons, or am I trying to be some YouTube sensation?
Most of my jumps by myself, I didn't bring cameras. And do you know Blake Milford?
Yes.
So
He was the DZO at Skydive San Diego.
Yeah.
He's yelled at me 1 or 2 times about very dumb things I've done.
classic. I love Blake.
I do too.
Blake and Nikki are awesome. And Blake, I remember him telling me early in my base jumping related life, he said, man, if the 2 most important cameras that we have aren't enough for you, then you shouldn't be jumping.
How many times have you seen people who are more concerned with making sure their GoPro is on than their gear is on
It's
correctly?
ridiculous.
I've watched somebody turn on, I think the maximum number was 7. 7 fucking GoPros. And he's in a wingsuit, right? We're talking wrist mount. We're talking multiple head mount, rear front ankle. And I'm just like, and all I could hear is beep, 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 beep. You know, the little jingle of the GoPro. And it's like, hey, man, can you make sure all my lights are on? I'm just like, fuck, dude, I'm out of here. I don't want to be a part of this.
I remember having a narwhal mount and having a line slap break it off and just being like, good riddance. Like that solves that. Yeah, exactly. And it was great. It's great.
But that experience, going up there and, standing on the edge, it was really cool because on that particular trip, we did the low, the middle, and the high Jungfrau because we had a local dude, Thor, who's out of his fucking mind. And he would just, in his like Icelandic, it's a little hike. And I would just be like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Because a little hike for you,
right?
For him, it's just, he's just this like Nordic pace. So he could have just plowed through waist deep snow at like 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So we did the low, the middle, and the high. I did all those with Alex. And I think the closest I've ever come to going in was off the high Jungfrau. It was visually intense. I had that thought in my head where I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then just flew out of it.
Good.
And,
good.
Yeah. And it was, and I couldn't tell, it was really hard for me to judge because all of the rock had a very similar color gradient. And, and Thor had helped us pick where we were going to go. And then he's just like, have a good jump. And off he goes.
Yeah.
So Alex and I are sitting up there like, are we in the right spot? Like,
yeah.
How's it look over there? He's like, it looks good. Mind you, this is 2 idiots who are still trying to figure out their way through the sport. It's just comparing the lack of knowledge. We both get to the ground. We're like, hey, that was really spicy. I'm never going to jump that again.
But I'm glad we did.
I'm glad we did. It was a great experience, and because it changed my thought process. But having those conversations and then being there by yourself, quiet, I got my visor up on that traditional, jump, just looking out at the beauty and realizing that I was doing it for the right reasons. I had, a wife, 3 young kids, the risk, the gravity of the responsibility, because the impact is much beyond me if I go in.
Sure.
I mean, for me, it's actually pretty instantaneous, I would assume or hope. Not so much for the people that you have left behind, but it was such a rich and powerful experience to stand there by yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, that slips by them. People that don't have those types of experiences or aren't attracted to those types of things, they forget. And they think it's just this utterly selfish thing, and I think that it does self-serve. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, for sure.
But I also think that I wouldn't have the perspective that I have without those experiences. So when I'm listening to my daughter, I'm listening with intention, and what might have been sort of trivial had I not, really realized my own mortality. In other words, these experiences, the intensity of the experience and what they teach me has allowed me to hopefully give a better part of myself to the people that deserve it, And I think if I can do anything in this world in terms of purpose, it's to be the best person that I can by example, by behavior, so that I can have some positive influence on other people in the same way that I appreciate the positive influence that people better than I have had on me, And I think, base jumping and climbing, and they are self-serving, but they do allow for that. And
I think it allows you to view the world from a different perspective as well, which allows you to then describe it, or when you're talking to your daughter, like you said, you can view something from slightly different angles. And so can give different feedback or take a different approach. It's, I'd rather be a multi-tool than, I'd rather be a Swiss Army knife than a Phillips head screwdriver.
Yeah.
Because I can, Phillips head is really good at one thing, but I think, I'm not going to be great at anything, but I think the diversity of experience, it helps in a lot of other aspects.
For me, it also points out that the purpose of it isn't the result, And I mean, that might sound super cliche, but it's true. It's like at one time, you know, ego and ambition were driving these things. And ironically, once I did them, I learned that ego and ambition were stupid reasons to do those things, you know? But what's cool about it as a result is you know, like I did this race in a paraglider called the X Pier. It's like the X Alps, you know,
Is this where it's a combined air ground?
Yeah, so
I've watched this. It
yeah.
looks awesome, except for the ground part. Fuck the ground part.
It's true. There is some suffering involved. Yeah. The premise of the X Pier was to race from the Bay of Biscay, which is on the Atlantic side of the Pyrenees, and to try and make it to the Mediterranean across the entirety of the range by foot and paraglider. And we had a support crew, and we could travel from, I want to say my memory's bad, but 6:30 to 9:30 or 10 at night. And then there was a flying window that you could fly in, you know. So a day would often look like waking up early, running with a pack on.
Because your paraglider's in the pack, right?
Yeah, you have to carry your own shit. Yeah. So you'd run up into the mountains to a launch. When the thermals start cracking, you launch and you try and fly cross country as far as you can. If you can land high, it's obviously best, because if you land low, then you got to hike back up. But if you land high, then you can try and run a ridge line, for instance, to another launch, and then get back in the air and try and, obviously, the more distance you can make via air is going to be more efficient. You know, walk a week or fly an hour, right? And then at the end of the day, fly you know, out of the mountains or to your support vehicle for a decent meal and some rest. And I remember getting really caught up in that race, and I made a mistake on day 3 that pretty much cost me being competitive, you know. But I had, you know, like I was super caught up in this competition. I was like, God damn it. You know, I landed at the bottom. I was fucking pissed, and my support guys helped me get ready. I ran like 7 miles to this mountain and hiked up as fast as I fucking could. And it was nuclear hot, and I pulled the paraglider out and I launched straight up to the black base of a cloud and started connecting the dots and flying back into the mountains towards this turn point deep in the fucking Pyrenees. Thinking to myself, what the fuck are you doing right now? Because it was like, you know, it was black back there and overdeveloped, and the clouds were lower than the peak tops, and I had to fly over there, but I couldn't see through there, you know? Like, well, fuck, I got to keep going. And luckily, I guess, there wasn't any energy. The clouds had shaded out everything, so there was zero convective energy, and I was found like scratching for bits and pieces of lift, trying to make it, and I like landed in this high coal and grabbed my wing and ran 100 yards up, and then pulled the wing back up and hooked it through this little pass through a bunch of rotor. And it was just like, I was super caught up in trying to make it to this turn point, you know?
Yeah.
Which when
this arbitrary turn point.
Totally. That meant nothing, right? And finally, at the end of the day, I find myself back in this trapped basin with, you know, 3,000 meters of mountain between me and the turn point, and no time, because the cutoff time for flying I had 2 hours or something, you know? There's no way I was even going to make it to the ridgeline. And I remember thinking, well, I'm fucked. And then I looked around and I was like, you know, you are fucking losing the plot. Because I'm in this like beautiful green basin with waterfalls pouring down this creek and like this alpine refugio way up in the, and it's just like, man, it's like a fucking postcard. And I'm up here by myself after flying, you know, however many miles that day and running.
Yeah.
And worried about some stupid fucking competition and or the way it presents on social media. And here I am, like, having the adventure of a lifetime in one of the most amazing places on the fucking planet. And I remember that was a big step forward, you know? It was like, okay, so all of those things that I'd learned from base jumping and from getting my ass handed to me over the years, they actually did make an impression, you know? Because now I could give a fuck about this competition. I'm stoked to be here now.
Yeah.
And it was a good experience, because the rest of that adventure, that X Pier, man, I ended up, you know, like battling weather every day. I'd like run up to a launch and fly until everything closed in storms, lightning. And I remember landing one day going backwards with high tension power lines behind me and lightning. And as soon as I got my wing in the bag, it's raining and hail. And I run for 40 Ks in the rain with a pack on. And at the end of the day, I was like, this is fucking awesome, you know? And it's because of that. It's because of this, like, the humility of understanding that this is a get to, man. The only things I have is time, and the only thing I have to do is die. Everything else I get to, and I chose to be there.
Yeah.
So like look at it from the right angle, man. Be a fucking stoic, because if you look at things from the right angle, nothing's bad. If they lead to personal growth, everything is good.
Yeah.
You know?
And oftentimes you can't choose what happens to you, but you can always choose how you receive it.
For sure. The only thing I can control is my mind and my behavior.
Yeah.
And if I was a spoiled little child throwing a tantrum because I wasn't competitive in a race that was a fucking vacation for most people, then I'd be a fool. And I don't want to live like that, you know? So
where did paragliding come into? Because we talked about base jumping and skydiving, and obviously you started with hang gliding. Where did paragliding come into that story?
well, you know, paragliding and hang gliding are 85% exactly the same.
They are?
Yeah, I mean the vehicles are different, right?
Yeah.
One is prone and involves a flex wing, and the other is a bag wing, and you're sitting, you know, you're seated.
Do they have
supine.
similar flight characteristics and abilities?
They're not weight. They're both sort of weight shift aircraft, but no, they're the axis of control is different, but the performance levels are similar enough, and the decisions relative to where to be and where not to be, how to use wind and convection to travel, the skybound and sort of groundbound clues as to how to navigate your way from point A to an undetermined point B. That game is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you're using the same strategy in a paraglider that you are a hang glider. It's just a different vehicle. And once you learn how to fly and manage the vehicle and the limitations of that vehicle, then you can apply all of your experience.
Playing on the same chessboard, just different pieces.
For sure. The only benefit of a paraglider, or one of the main benefits, not the only, but one of the main ones, is that when you land, you can put the thing on your back and walk. So if you're you know, you land like in a hang glider, I was making decisions with a level of responsibility that took into account that if I landed in the middle of nowhere, I was either going to have to hire a helicopter to get it, or I was going to have to leave my glider, and no flight is worth that. So it made sense to land close to roads and to be responsible relative to the decisions about how I was going to get home. And in a paraglider, it matters fuck all. You can land in the middle of nowhere
and walk yourself out.
And if you're fit and you have a device to be able to tell the people who care about you that you're okay, you can be out there for days.
Which pro tip, you should have that device.
For sure, yeah.
There's no excuse not to have some type of, well, everybody's got a cell phone, but attach some type of satellite communication device to it.
The Garmin InReach is like the way to go.
Yeah.
It really is. Like 2-week communication, being able to tell your friends and family that you're okay, makes me less stressed and able to focus on the task at hand, which is either to hike to another launch so I can fly myself out, or to run or hike out, you know. And to be able to do these multi-day expeditions, like last year, a friend of mine and I hiked and flew our way across a large portion of the Anwar, you know, across the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
That's crazy.
And there's no infrastructure, there's no roads, there's no trails. It's just wilderness forever out there. And so, you know, who cares about landing in the middle of nowhere? The point was to land in the middle of nowhere. And
you're seeking the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. And so, you know, how far we made it, numbers on a red line on a map for some magazine art, it meant nothing to us. It was just being there, being present, and enjoying that adventure. And so paraglider, in relation to a hang glider, or in comparison to a hang glider, allows you to be able to do that.
Can you carry more stuff with a paraglider too?
You can. In a hang glider, you know, the glider weighs 70 pounds. The harness with a parachute weighs another 30 to 40 pounds. So with a kit, you're already talking over 100 pounds, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, when I did this expedition in the Brooks Range, you know, we had 65-pound packs, and my paraglider and my harness and all that stuff was only like, you know, 7 or 8 kgs of that.
Yeah.
So it's all food and fuel.
So much more
and
manageable.
Bivy gear. Right. So, you know, I have 80 liters of storage in my Volbiv paragliding harness. Volbiv translates in French to fly camp, you know.
Okay.
So 80 liters of storage is a lot of room.
That's quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, you can put, you know, like I said, we were carrying 10 to 11 days of food and fuel, plus our bivy gear and a sidearm and our paragliding kit, because we were completely self-sufficient. Although we were out there for 21 days, so we needed to be supported by a buddy of mine who's a bush pilot. He dropped another 10 days of food and fuel to us via Super Cub midway on that trip, via InReach. You know, I just sent him a message and said, here we are, you know, and
here's a grid coordinate.
And that's what led to me flying bush planes. This exact moment, actually. So you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you
No,
anyways.
don't
'cause
worry.
this
I
is
was
like-
going to.
Yeah, well,
because I know this is your new passion. Trevor was like, dude, his plane's awesome.
dude. Well, yeah. So I'd never been really that attracted to motorized flight. I had a little bit of stick and rudder time over the years, chasing kangaroos in Australia in an ultralight or whatever,
Yeah.
But flying from airport to airport never really interested me. So I get to Alaska and I meet up with this guy who's going to help us. And Johnny Olson is like the quintessential Alaskan cowboy bush pilot. And you've got to have him on the show. I mean,
I would love to.
he's the kind of, he's got an IQ of 155 and no internet. He's one of those dudes, just a wall. Like he flew himself in his Super Cub from Alaska to some Midwest state in the U.S. because a library was going to get demolished or burnt down, and he wanted the aerodynamic papers and books that were in the library.
I like this guy already.
He's got he's one of the only guys in the world that can weld titanium in a tank of argon. He's got security clearance. He's a really interesting dude. Yeah,
we might have to swap contact info with this dude.
And he's been a sheep and moose guide for 45 years.
Wow.
The stories this guy tells. I mean, I could tell you one or two of them that would just literally blow your fucking mind. And I asked myself, is this guy for real? And then he'd show me pictures.
Yeah.
Like, cutting a DC-3 up with a Sawzall that he made with a 30-foot bar, it's just like, it's crazy. So I get there to, 8 hours before my partner because his flight got delayed. And we get back to his place in Fairbanks and Johnny's like, hey man, you want to go flying? And I've never met this guy, and I'm like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he says, all right, jump in the front seat, of his Cub, 35s. And in 2 hours, I'm laughing out loud. We're landing on riverbanks, we're landing on grass strips, and he's just...
It's ridiculous where those things, the capabilities.
Totally. And he knows that I know from, we're having this like banter about aerodynamics.
A wing is a wing,
right.
broadly.
And
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, when this happens and then you do this and then you do that. And we're just like slipping it down mountain faces and dropping it in over tree lines. And I got back and I was like, man, the hook was in the mouth, right? And then I go on this expedition and, there was no point in that trip that I wanted to be somewhere else, but my mind was on bush planes. I'm like in the tent thinking like, man, how am I going to pull this off?
Flying a paraglider, like, God, this would be awesome.
Yeah, because I'm a fucking dirtbag. I don't got any money. And aviation is not inexpensive, right?
There is no portion of aviation, and I've seen this now from, somebody who was recreationally doing it and then somebody who did like Part 135 charter flying.
Right.
There is zero portion of aviation that is not ridiculously expensive.
Right. And so, yeah, how do you make that happen? Either ways, I'm thinking materialize, manifest, And so I'm in the tent watching it rain, thinking about bush planes, and we get 10 days into this trip, and now we have no food, and, we had allotted for 1,500 calories a day. We're spending 7,000.
Yeah.
So, I went in purposefully heavy. Like I think I weighed like 173 pounds or something when I went in. I came out at 158 or 156. I was losing weight, so was Cody, but we were in such a good headspace that, 10 days, we're hungry as fuck, but we're like, we're going to be fine. This is great.
Well, plus it was planned. So, and I've often found that if you can plan for that type of stuff, it becomes infinitely more manageable.
For sure.
If you had to do that and you didn't realize that was going to happen, it probably would have sucked a lot more.
And we weren't feeling weak. We were feeling fit,
Yeah.
So everything was fine, but it was stormy, and I'll never forget this, man. So we're camped on the side of this river, sort of at the tailwaters of the Ivashak, which is like one of the main arteries. And the clouds are 250 feet off the ground. It's raining sideways, blowing like 40, no exaggeration. The tents are barely staying up, and there's lightning. And Johnny's sending me messages saying he can't get over Carter Pass, which is a gnarly spot, It's like, I've tried 3 times. I can't get over Carter Pass. Can you guys hold tight? And I'm like, bro, do not risk anything. Like, we are fine. Don't sweat it, wait it out. So 10:45 at night, I'm kind of just starting to drift off. It's bright as daylight
Of course,
out, right?
yeah.
But the clouds are super low. And it's nuking, and I hear the telltale drone of a Super Cub. And I said, Cody, do you hear that? And he was like, he kind of woke up, and he's like, is that a... And I was like, that's a fucking Super Cub. So I get out of I put on rain pants and Gore-Tex and hoods up and get out of the tent and walk to the edge, and sure as shit, here comes Johnny in his Super Cub. He's 10 feet off the deck over this river. carving between rocks. I mean, this is like full on IMC conditions, and he's got a 6-pack in that thing. He's got no ILS gear at all.
For
like,
sure.
He doesn't even have GPS.
It's okay because there's no ILS out there anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right. But he's got a paper map in his lap. You
Yeah.
know it, right? And well, actually, it's more in his mind. And so he's carving, 10 feet off the creek in the Super Cub with 35s, buzzes the tents at 100 miles an hour, throws an impossible turn. He goes up into the clouds. I hear him cut the power to idle, chops it, comes down, drops 3 notches of flaps, swings the ass into the plane around, puts it down as soft as can be on this 100-foot patch of gravel, stops, drives across the river. I mean, he's got water all the way to the top of his 35s. Water's driving through the prop over the windshield, and he pulls up next to camp and gets out in a T-shirt and calmly walks over to us. And he's like, "Hey, you boys hungry?" With a platform of strawberries in the back. And it was, to this day, it was the most impressive piece of aviation I've ever seen. And
well, it's from what you described, it combines so many ridiculously technical aspects.
I don't know how he even got in there. And now the hook is not in my mouth. It is driven all the way through my cheek. And I'm like, man, I have to do that. It was like the coolest, and it was, I was like, man, in terms of aviators, you are a bad motherfucker. I literally,
he's a gunslinger of aviators.
Exactly.
For sure.
Like the amount of respect. And he was so, he would tell you he's a coward. Like there was no machismo or, bravado about it. He was just like, man, I tried this and I tried that and it didn't work. And at the end of the day, you just have to ask yourself one question: does it work or doesn't it? And when I got through, I knew I was going to get to you boys, and his level of care for us, I think he was attracted to trying to see if he could do it, but
for sure, there was an aspect
for
of that.
sure, but it was cool. And he stayed there for a couple of days and that single experience, it solidified my desire to take that path and to try and realize that.
But what you're describing too is so different, I think, than most people's perception of general aviation, because general aviation is not what you described. It's, and I can tell you because I went through the process myself. It's when you first learn how to fly, you are living in a linear environment of a runway environment.
Right.
You learn to, first you got to learn how to turn the fucking thing on. You got your checklist, and then you learn how to taxi, and then you do the most horrendous takeoff, which is only followed by a worse, more horrendous landing.
Sure.
With an instructor putting a lot more input into the airplane than you actually think they are.
For sure. For sure. You're like, I totally had that. And he was like, yeah, you did.
As they're over there dripping in sweat with like a death grip on the actual steering controls. But then, it's all patterns, left-hand or right-hand pattern. It's very linear, and, you practice the engine out stuff, but on a linear environment. Then you'll do a cross country, and it wasn't, even when I was doing so I have just over 3,000 hours of flight time, and I've been very fortunate. I was able to fly, but it was always generally from an airport to pick somebody else up at an airport. I've landed off of a runway environment exactly 0 times. So even my aviation experience is the exact opposite of what you're describing.
Sure. Yeah.
And I got a buddy who was, he actually works in the film industry. His name's Tim Rigby. Skydiver, stuntman, and I remember he was learning to fly, and he had his instrument rating before I even started, but he would seek out like mountain flying courses, and he had his own Cessna. Like that's the kind of stuff that he's into as well.
Yeah.
And that is the type of aviation that I think would just grab people. But to get exposed to that, I mean, here we're super fortunate here. We could get exposed to that, but where I lived in San Diego, I don't even know where you'd seek that out.
No, it's a massive trip just to be exposed to it more or less. Learn how to do it with any regularity.
You might be able to find the plane, but to actually be able to do any of the land anywhere other than that environment, I don't even know.
Yeah, the airspace is really complicated down there too.
Yeah.
So, here in Montana, we're very close to one of the meccas of backcountry flying in the lower 48, which is in the Frank Church. When the wilderness was designated, they grandfathered in, there's like 44 strips back there or something. Some are gnarlier than others, some are golf courses, and some are,
Are they actual golf courses? Because that'd be amazing.
They probably could be.
Yeah, like, oh, my bad, I was landed on the green, sucks.
Yeah. What you could do. But I wanted to fly an airplane like I flew a hang glider or like I fly a paraglider, and that meant in the mountains, not flying over the mountains, but in them and through them.
Yeah.
And being able to if you're getting your ass kicked in the rotor up high, dive down and fly like a salmon swimming upstream from rock to rock and fly in the lee and understand all the complexity of what you're doing to try and make it safely to navigate through mountain environment in an airplane, and then to have the right tool for the job, and certainly the access to be able to get to places and do the things that we love to do, and once again in a way that only that type of vehicle can get you there. It's like when you're kayaking whitewater down a river that's got walls on both sides, you realize very instantly that you can only be there in a kayak, right? And in an airplane, it's the same way. Like, you go back to these backcountry strips and you'd have to walk 2 weeks to get there unless you were flying the airplane, and then
it probably took you 2 hours.
Right. And so, when I learned, I just kind of like put my head down and went for it, and ended up getting a bush plane. I got the plane from a guy in Ontario, and didn't have my license yet. A guy that I used to race hang gliders with is a CFI and an airline captain. He met me over there just for the fun of it, sat in the back seat, and we spent 28 hours dodging weather for 5 days from eastern Canada all the way back to Montana.
Awesome.
Yeah, flew down into all the way into Colorado before heading back up into Montana, just because the whole northern part of the states was painting. And
was it summertime?
Yep.
Yeah, you were dealing with all
late summer. Yeah. And
thunderstorm time.
Oh man, I landed in Yuma, Colorado one night, and we took off because we couldn't get fuel there. We took off to do a little 15-minute hop to another airstrip to get fuel, and immediately saw this gust front coming. The sky turned green and was dark, and I saw this gust front coming. I was like, Alex, my spidey sense is the same. We should turn around. So I turned around, landed again at Yuma, and by the time I had the tail tied down, it was no exaggeration. It was blowing 30 to 40 gusts into 60, and the tornado sirens started going off in town. And then lightning, every 3 seconds there's a bolt of lightning, and this massive funnel cloud formed to the ground north of town, moving north, so we were okay.
Yeah.
But it was just a wild experience as a new pilot. And
imagine being in the air for that.
Jesus, huh?
I mean, you probably wouldn't be in the air for long.
Yeah.
It'd be a hell of a ride down.
Yeah. But it was a cool trip. And then since then have been learning specifically, and for the sole purpose of learning how to fly on the deep side of the power curve, to fly STOL and just learn how to land and take off in the shortest environments. My plane has 31s and shocks, and I can land on bowling balls in that thing, and it takes off and lands, and I can land the thing in less than 100 feet and no wind, and it's a really capable airplane.
So crazy.
Yeah, so that's been really cool, and now I'm just finally getting to the point where my skill set, I feel like I'm like you and I could throw base gear or whatever gear in the back of the plane and then go have one.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I got it for, was their toys and their tools.
Yeah.
So to be able to go bow hunting and get yourself out of the mountains with an animal, or strap a kayak or a mountain bike to the outside of the airplane, or throw the base gear or the paraglider in the back, or a surfboard and go land on the beach, an airplane, if it's used correctly, can deliver.
It unlocks a lot of things. It's like it's a master key.
Yeah. And they're fun as fuck.
Yes, they are.
Carving down a river like 10 feet off the water below treetop level and passing bald eagles looking down on you is pretty fun. I'm like laughing out loud. It's like a little kid,
God, again, it's so hard to describe those experiences unless you've actually experienced it, though.
Yeah.
The verbal description is often tough, I think, to live up to the reality of watching that through camera 1, camera 2.
For sure, yeah, and just the fascination with flight over the years through falconry or through all of the sports that I've enjoyed they've all, like my dad used to say, everything we do in life perfectly prepares us for what's next, even if we don't know what's coming. And I feel like learning how to fly this bush plane is kind of in a lot of ways it's I don't know, it's a bit of a culmination of a lot of interest, fascination, and experimentation over the years,
Well, your cumulative experience through your diverse passions is going to help with that too, because you can take a lot of those chunks and directly apply it. I mean, it's not, backcountry is not new to you. Being in the air is not new to you. Understanding weather patterns not new. It's, again, you're on the same chessboard, but you got a different tool.
For sure, yeah. And there's nothing better in life than to be a beginner. Like learning something new, I said this before too, I don't give a shit about being the best at anything anymore. I love learning new things.
Yeah.
And like this, man, it's such a turn on to have your learning curve like this steep, and to experience new stuff and in new ways and be introduced to new people and see new things. Man, I would struggle to find anything that's better than that.
I often find too that people that are incredibly good at one thing often suck at many other.
Yeah.
I mean, they find that sweet, and I'm not saying you shouldn't pursue that, but I'd rather be a generalist than a specialist.
Yeah.
I think it would reward the choices that I want to continue to make in my life more than just being great at any one thing.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure you're the same way. I know you are. Anything we decide to do, whether we're good at it or not, in comparison to someone else doesn't matter, right?
Correct.
Because comparison is the killer of all joy. Like, there's always someone that's stronger. There's always someone that's better, right?
And it's dangerous to do that over the long term because it'll turn you off to stuff.
For sure. And it changes the reason.
Yeah.
But doing something the very best that I can do it and continuing to strive to improve is something that I try and do with everything I do. So whether I'm good compared to somebody else doesn't matter. I just want to be better than I was yesterday at everything I do, and that's not just for ego or self-satisfaction. It's for longevity. It's for intellectual and professional stimulus. It's for a whole variety of reasons, and I think it all boils down to wanting to be the best version of myself that I can be, not just for my own reasons, but to be able to share it with other people too. And I always appreciate meeting people that do that because they end up giving the best part of themselves to me, which is cool, and I'm grateful for it.
And if you frame it like that, the journey never ends.
Right.
If it's framed as in a comparison or a competition to somebody else, what do you do if you exceed that person?
Right.
You're like, oh, well, I guess I'm done.
Nah, man. I want to be an old fucker and saying like, man, remember when we did that shit? You know? And man, that whole fortune cookie thing of like, I'd rather die with a lot of memories than dreams. That is true. Like I haven't
heard that one, but I like that.
Yeah,
I'd rather die with a lot of memories than dreams. Hell yes.
Yeah, because it has to start with a dream. But man, the only person that's going to do it is us.
For sure.
Like we got to go do it. And then obviously if you're lucky enough to have the opportunities, then it would almost be a travesty it would like be taking it for granted if you didn't take advantage of those opportunities and do it to the fullest value, and then those opportunities that you can share and give to other people, then you should, because they were given to us, and in that way that circle continues.
I couldn't agree more. How did you get into falconry? Let's not just blow over the fact that you just mentioned you're a falconer as well.
Man, falconry is fucking cool, and a lot of people think I'm a total dork, and I get it. I know
one falconer now.
Well, it's funny. What's funny? What's funny to me is I remember there was a Joe Rogan. Speaking of Joe, because I know you guys are friends.
Yeah.
Chris Ryan, Dr. Christopher Ryan.
Okay.
He came to the house. I'd never met this guy. He's a really, really good dude. Came to the house and he just called me out of the blue and said, "Hey man, you want to do a podcast together?" And absolutely, yeah, that'd be fun. We had a conversation. He did a podcast with Joe later, and he mentioned. I think he mentioned me in some sort of tangent, and he mentioned I was a falconer, and Joe was like, "Oh, he's a falconer." he's like, I was just starting to like that guy, And
Joe doesn't know shit about falconry.
No. So I totally get it, though. I think it's funny. But for me, hunting, if we're going to be meat eaters, you got to do that shit with respect and responsibility. Like,
couldn't agree more.
You can't go and turn your conscience off and eat some miserable animal. You got to feel the feelings that, I don't like killing shit, but I need to feel that to appreciate what I'm putting into my body, I
always advise people to not outsource their murder.
Right.
Because just because you get it,
at
a grocery store doesn't remove the things that occur to get it into the grocery store.
And even in a worse way, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, tangent, but hunting is a privilege. And in Montana,
we won the fucking lottery.
We won the fucking lottery.
I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
And so I was hunting pheasants with a buddy. We were walking with shotguns and dogs, and one of the dogs found a short-eared owl that somebody had shot. Short-eared owls are coming out of the grass all the time. I'm sure it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But here's this little owl, and he's like wings open, looking at me, And I thought to myself, man, do I let nature take its course and this thing get eaten by a coyote, or do I pick this thing up and take it to a vet, or it was a raptor
nature
rehabber.
reserve or something?
Yeah, there's now I've learned
Yeah.
there's this specialized group of people who are rehabbers of
Because you're a
raptors.
fucking falconer.
Yeah. Fucking funny. So I take this owl home, and I have it in this box and a little bit of pheasant meat, because of course that's what they, I'm thinking to myself, like, I know everything, right? I know shit. And I put this owl in this box with a towel over this, and I turn the light off, and I close the door, and my wife comes home. This is like before my daughter was born. I'm like, Kara, you got to come see this. There's a fucking owl. And she's like, what? There's what? I open the door, and this owl has jumped out of the box. It's on the bed, and it's like, whoop, like, looks at her. I was like, holy shit. I run in there with a sheet, and we turn the light off, and I kind of drape the sheet over and pick it up, because I didn't want it. Its wing was badly broken.
Yeah.
So I take it to a raptor rehabber. Turns out she was a falconer. She loaned me some books. She gave me this, hood.
Meaning the little thing that goes over the falcon's eyes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I was just fascinated by it. I didn't know people did that.
Yeah.
It's this ancient art. I knew about it, but I didn't know that that there was a contemporary following at all. And so it happens to be the most regulated hunting sport in the country. You need to find a sponsor who's a general or a master falconer who will sign their name to your paperwork to take you under their wing for the first 2 years as an apprentice. You have to pass a 120 question test with FWP. You go to FWP headquarters and you take this test that involves identification and medications and history and all kinds of stuff. And then once you pass your test and you have your signature, they come to your house and inspect your falconry furniture, the gear that you need. Like they don't want some jackass to trap or train a raptor or have one as a pet, right? They're not pets.
This seems reasonable.
Partners. Totally reasonable. So they come, once you pass your inspection, you're now an apprentice falconer for 2 years, and you can hunt with a red tail or a kestrel, passage birds trapped from the wild. And after gaining that experience, if your sponsor writes a letter of recommendation, then you can apply for your general permit, and you have to be a general for another 7 years and 3 more letters of recommendation before you can get your master permit.
What the fuck, man?
Yeah. So it's a pretty involved scenario, but the magic is in the journey, right? Like everything. So I decided to commit to this, and I trapped a female red tail and hunted with her hard for the first year. I pulled a red tail from a nest for the second year, which was a mistake. You learn that red tails, certain types of birds are better pulled as eyases or chicks, and others are better trapped as subadults, and others are better parent raised, and others are better captive raised or imprinted. I mean, it depends on the species. And
how did you trap your first one?
With so you can. There's a lot of different methods for obtaining a bird in the wild. You can use a trap called a balchatry, which is like a cage where you put a rodent running around in the cage, and the whole cage is covered with monofilament slip nooses, and the bird sees it, lands on the cage, and gets noosed, right?
Yep.
Another one is a version of that. It's on a pigeon harness, a harness that protects a pigeon. You have a pigeon connected to an 8-foot piece of line with a weight on the end. It can't get away. It's flapping all over the place. It's covered by a cowhide harness with slip nooses all over it. The hawk or the falcon hits that thing, gets noosed. You go over and you get the bird, and the pigeon is released, normally completely unharmed.
Yeah.
And when you get the hawk, the hawk or the falcon thinks you're going to eat it. So it's just in this like shock state. And you slip a hood over its head, put blinders on it essentially, carefully fold its wings, put the thigh section of a woman's stocking over the bird, and then you take it back to the car and you inspect it for health, and you fit it for Almeri bracelets and the jesses and a bell if you're going to use one, and you take it home and you put it in a cool dark room for 24 hours, and then you begin the manning process. And the manning? Yeah, and so when you begin this process, what you're essentially doing is taking a wild animal that thinks of you as a predator and removing fear and convincing it that you're an advantage in its life. And raptors are exceptionally smart relative to adaptation. Huh. So it doesn't take long for them to get to that point. And when you see a wild raptor that is, they're not social. You can't discipline a raptor. They just know fight or flight.
Yeah.
If you do something negative to a raptor, it's either going to grab you or it's going to fly away. That's all they know. So when you take a raptor who thinks that you're going to kill it, and after a week of consistency and positive reinforcement, it walks unleashed across the perch and reaches for food to your glove and can't get it and jumps to your glove and then eats and exposes the back of its neck to you, to that raptor, there's no difference in that 6 inches and 3 miles. And so the same whistle, the same presentation will call a bird from 2 miles away on a pole that it took for it to hop 6 inches off the perch to your glove. And that process from that point happens quite rapidly until the bird says, oh, well, not only is this thing not going to kill and eat me, but it's actually going to provide the 3 things that I need most. The third being a safe place to roost at night. The second being the opportunity to eat every day, because a raptor will starve to death in 3 days in the wild.
No shit.
Oh, yeah.
I did not know that.
And especially in the winter. And the most important is the opportunity to chase, catch, and kill shit, because that's what they love to do, right? And the smaller the bird, the more consequential. But say a goshawk will lose up to 100 grams a night. So and when it's cold, even maybe a little bit more. So if a goshawk in the wild doesn't eat today, it's going to be really hungry and susceptible to diseases like aspergillosis and all kinds of stuff. If it doesn't eat the second day, now it's weak and it might not be successful hunting. On the third day, it falls over, dies. And so, the falconer is providing this environment or this advantage in this raptor's life that it recognizes on a genetic level, and it will cooperatively hunt with you. And at the end of the season, by feeding it more, because a lot of the art of falconry is relative to weight control, how much a bird weighs or how much food they have in them is directly proportional to their behavior.
That makes sense.
When they're fat and happy, they sit on a pole. Why would they come to you? They don't want to come to you. You're stuck there for 6 hours waiting for this dumb fucking bird to fly down to your fist, right? Well, they're not dumb. They're very smart. Why would I fly to that guy?
He's like a full
I don't need
bitch.
him. Right, exactly. But when they're too light and too hungry, then they're weak and they can't hunt very well, and now they're susceptible to all these things in the air. So you're trying to play this game, and at the end of the season, you feed the bird more than it needs. You make sure that it's super healthy. You've already presented opportunities for it to kill prey that are larger and more lucrative than it normally would in the wild. So now it's more capable. And then you take and you cut off all the jesses and the leather, and you take its head off and you let it fly away, and it doesn't come back. And now it's back into the wild. And that's this process that I would go through year after year until recently, I got a bird from a friend of mine who was a breeder. He's a half Gyr, half peregrine falcon, and imprinted him from the time he was an IS. Before he could even walk, he was kind of a family member, and it's a much different level of interaction. When he was still a brancher, which is like too young to fly but could run around, he would like be on the couch and like jump off the couch onto my dog's back and ride him around the house like a fucking rodeo, It's hilarious. But he's still a slayer in the field. He's a fucking bird. Like he is a falcon. There's a tiercel, but it's the falconiform. So now, and the way you train him is quite slightly different. But now I go out into the field. When my dog was alive, we'd go out and the dog would point the pheasant. I'd take the hood off the bird. As soon as you release the, take off his jesses, he's on his own. You're no longer in control. He's in control. Takes off, and he starts doing circles, and he'll gain 500 feet above me and follow me through the field, and just be looking down, and he'll stay on the wing above me 500 feet doing circles.
And is he kind of just watching you?
Yep.
Or everything
and
around
the dog,
you too?
And he knows the dog because of the training. And so he's looking around. Obviously, if an eagle comes into the, I can hear him right away. When he makes a certain call, I know there's an eagle in the area, But
which I'm assuming that's bad.
Bad, yeah.
Because the eagle will.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. He's like the cheetah and sees the male lion coming, right? And so they know,
Yeah.
But then if I'm lucky, the dog will go on point. The bird sees that, starts doing circles overhead, takes a set, just like opens his wings and stops flapping. And I know he's ready, and I'll run in, and the dog and I will flush the pheasant. And as soon as the pheasant comes out of the grass, that sound, I look up, and my bird's name is Cirrus, Cirrus will fold up, roll over upside down, fold up in a bullet, and it doesn't even look fucking real. He comes out of the sky. It's like he is tearing a hole in the atmosphere, man. It is literally like, it sounds like an egg sizzling in a pan. And he comes out of the sky at 150 plus miles an hour and smacks that bird, and generally that thing hits the ground like a basketball, dead as a doorknob. And sometimes he doesn't. He just knocks it down, and then he'll do a big wing over and land on it and kill it on the ground. And I get the sense that he does that just because he wants to,
Yeah.
But then through the training, he'll stand on it and he'll pluck all its feathers, because that's what they do naturally, and wait for me. And I walk up with the dog, and the dog lays down. I give him a treat. I kneel down next to the bird. He jumps up onto the fist and eats the quail that I brought for him.
Yeah.
And I put the pheasant in the vest and take it home, and we eat it,
Holy shit, man.
It's pretty fucking cool. And it's fun to be a part of it. And then the history of it is a whole nother conversation. Like, I got to go to Mongolia 2 years ago to fly a paraglider, and I spent some time with a eagle hunter and his family, and to see that, to see his eagles and to interact with him and talk to him as a contemporary falconer and as a guy who's hunting with the eagle the same way that it's been done for 10,000 years was a cool experience too. So that whole world has brought a lot of flavor and texture to life too, And, my daughter, it's so funny, man. She came home from, it must have been second grade or first grade. She's like, Dad, I thought everybody had a peregrine in the house. I'm like, sugar, no, that's actually not true.
Very few do. I can't believe that before the peregrine, you would release the bird every year. I had no idea that it was a revolving exchange.
Well, and a lot of people would say, well, how have you done all this other shit? And that was the deal, was falconry, the way it was kind of a shoulder season thing for me, when the ice climbing wasn't good and the flying was kind of bad and the rock climbing was too wet, I would trap a hawk or a falcon and train it and hunt with it for 2 or 3 months and then release it and be released of the responsibility, and then be able to do all these trips and travel, because
that makes sense.
Now I can travel and my partner takes care of the bird, or if we're together, I'll take it up to another falconer's place because he's so easy and well behaved and easy to deal with. When I had this like goshawk that was a fucking dinosaur. I mean, this thing was like, man, you had to like, if I drop something, I would like hold him way out here because he'd reach out and grab me in the face, And that bird, I wouldn't let Kara or Naya even near, because a big powerful hawk can hurt you.
Yeah, some risk involved in that for sure.
I mean, not like real risk, but risk in a way that I wouldn't want them to have a bad experience. And or what do you do? It's like one time this peregrine grabbed me. It was a bird that came to my chamber from a breeding project and hadn't been handled at all and was kind of wild, and I was just like working with it. And I made a mistake, and she grabbed me, and man, one talon buried all the way through the meat of my thumb, all the way through the meat of this thing, and the other one was buried in my hand. And what do? You can't, if you pull away or you grab it or do something, it will never forget or forgive, ever.
Yeah.
Like, they just have that. So I got to figure out how to solve a problem and promote a behavior with positive reinforcement. How the fuck do you do that?
While experiencing excruciating pain.
So as my eyes are watering, I take a piece of meat out and I hold it under its beak, and it took a while because it's just looking at me, with its talons buried in my hand. Finally, it sees the meat and it goes down to get it. And when it bites it, I don't let it tear. I just go with it. Every time it tries to pull, I just go with it. Finally, at that point, when it needed to tear off,
which
it
required
released
its talon
and put its hand on the meat on this hand, and stepped onto this hand. Now he's on this hand and he's let go of this hand, and I just carefully put him back on the perch, give him the meat, and walk out, go and clean the fucking wounds, and walk back in and finish the session. And that bird would never even remembered that moment.
Yeah.
But if I would have done something, it would have never been trainable ever. Right?
Wow.
So solving problems with positive reinforcement is one of those weird falconry things that seems to cross over into regular life too, It's kind of funny.
What's your falcon doing right now? Is he just like watching
Man.
Netflix?
Yeah, pretty much. He's watching Discovery Channel. No, we're in the off season.
Yeah.
I can hunt with him September 1 to March 31st. So he's molting. In the spring, they lose all their feathers and they grow new ones. Most falconers keep their birds fat and happy. They can't legally hunt them anyways. Mm. So, man, I just keep them overweight. I interact with them, several times a day. I have a perch in the house. I put him up on this perch, and he just like watches the world go by. And man, he knows no different. Yeah. So, like in a wild bird, I would release because, he deserves to make his own living and have that freedom. But this bird, man, he's perfectly happy doing what he's done for the last 5 seasons in a row, knowing that when the season starts, he's going to be flying every day,
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty fun. You'll have to come down and check it out, or I'll actually meet you because I actually hunt pheasants up here.
I was thinking I need to become a falconer.
I was thinking that too. So I have someone else that I can say, well, Andy does it.
When Trevor was leaving your house, he was like, man, what do you think about paragliding? I was like, Trevor, I need another hobby like I need another fucking hole in my head. I found a speed wing I had the other day. I'm like, oh, I forgot I had this. I don't have the time to stay current on that either. It's like, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
No, it sounds incredibly intriguing. It's
a cool way to travel. It's a cool way to fly. It's really unique because it's minimal. And what's interesting, I think, is, I'm lucky enough to guide paraglider pilots in the winter in Colombia. It's a nice break from the Montana winter. And a lot of our clients are these amazing dudes. They're like fighter pilots, F-18 pilots. We've got a couple of Harrier pilots.
I don't know shit.
Yeah.
That actually doesn't surprise me.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because coming from motored flight to gliding flight is more difficult than from gliding flight to motored flight. Like engine outs, that practice is like, well, oh, thank God I'm finally in a hang glider, right? Like there's no such thing as a go around in a hang glider.
This is true.
But it is interesting to see these amazing pilots, like incredibly well-trained military pilots, fly paragliders and find so much joy in it that at the end of the day, they're just like 9-year-old kids. Like their eyes are sparkling. They're like, holy shit, I was at cloud base and this bird came and flew with me. It was amazing. I mean, you'd probably love it, man.
I'm sure that I would, and I don't have much experience around. I did a backseat ride in an F-18 for a couple hours, and just an understanding at a general level. It's so electronic heavy. They're managing a lot of systems and managing the airplane, I think, a lot of the time instead of flying it. Whereas I'd imagine paragliding is a much more tactile in the moment.
I'd still be lying if I said I wouldn't want to barrel roll at 1,000 miles an hour. That'd be pretty fucking bad to the
Listen,
bone.
I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I think it's just a wildly different experience. And I bet,
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, even the Gulfstream that I was flying, it's checklists, it's system management. You're managing systems in an airplane, and the airplane's it's had auto throttles, autopilot.
Yep.
You're managing a lot of stuff. I mean, to be up there and weight shifting and moving around and having there's no birds. Well, I guess there could be birds that flew with the Gulfstream, but it would be probably into the windscreen or the nacelle.
Not ideal. Not ideal.
Correct.
But in a paraglider, it is vulnerable. Like you can turn into a bag of chips in a snowstorm pretty quick
I've seen some pretty horrendous YouTube videos.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
Yeah. So.
But you said there's a reserve parachute, right? So what could go wrong?
There is, or two.
What?
Yeah, I have two in my comp glider. And it's because of the idea that if you're pushing hard, you could end up with a reserve in your main, and having a second, backup to the backup is nice. But to combat any potential accident, the first step is to have good judgment. And in paragliding, the mistake is often made, right? And I have to admit, even in paragliding and hang gliding and certain types of aviation, it's not inherently dangerous. It's just unforgiving of human error. So you have
that's a good point.
This chain of events that has to happen where if you were to remove any link in that chain, the accidents probably wouldn't happen, right? And in a base jump, that chain is one link generally. So there is room for error in paragliding and in aviation. General aviation, even bush flying, which is certainly a step maybe closer to, I should say, I don't know if I would say that. I was going to say that a mistake might be more expensive in the mountain environment in general aviation than it would be in an airport environment, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I think a mistake is a mistake, and they can be expensive in both environments. So
yeah, I'd agree with you. You just probably have different options in each environment.
Yeah, and I do know coming options that's a good way to state it, because there are several strips, and some that I just landed in last week that once you're past a certain point, you're in closeout terrain and you are going to land one way or another. There's no go around.
It's very similar to some base jumping lines where if you choose to, you can go left, right, or center off the exit, and if you go left, you got a clear mandatory performance object. But once you do that, you're riding the line for what the line is.
Yeah, you might be in a no-pull zone for a while, and that's something that you accept when you make that decision.
And hopefully you know that you're actually in a no-pull zone.
Yeah.
Because I've watched people, again, on exit points talking about what they're going to do, and I'm just like, I need to get the fuck out of here. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I jump first?
Exactly. That's so funny that you'd say that, because I've used that one. So like, hey, man, I might just go if that's okay with you. You know?
I got to meet somebody for a thing.
Right.
I just don't want to hear any more of this.
Right.
And I got to bomb out.
Right.
Has your perspective on base jumping changed at all as you've gotten older or had a family or had kids?
For sure. I mean, I wouldn't say because of being a dad. When I learned how to base jump, I was 14 months old, you know.
I had kids as well when
and
I
people
learned.
always say, like, man, like, how could you do that? And I was like, man, I didn't want to die before I had a kid. Like, I don't see that much of a difference other than the impact that you would have by, checking out. But
Both literal and metaphorical.
yeah, but it has evolved, but it's evolved based on my experiences, as you would expect, not because of. I mean, you tell me if you agree with this, because I have a strong suspicion that you will.
Okay.
I don't wake up and get out of bed like I used to. I don't feel the same level of recovery, level of I shouldn't say level of motivation, but reason for motivation. I'm as motivated as ever, but I'm motivated by different things.
Yep.
And I can't not be affected by some of these experiences. When you hear that sound, someone hitting a ledge, or
it's unmistakable and you'll never forget it.
Never forget it. And when you've seen the consequences, I try and make decisions based on logic and never emotion, but we're out there essentially seeking an emotional response, doing the things that we love to do. When I think of the consequences, that is not the same. It's not even the same fucking sport as experiencing the consequence. Yeah. So, my feelings of base jumping have changed dramatically based on a close call, based on seeing the results and getting the phone calls and dealing with the aftermath. Does that affect? Is it fear driven that I'm not jumping the same way or as much as I used to? No, it's just not as important as it was, Yeah. And really priority and what's important in life and what isn't. It's such a personal thing, man. It's like risk. Risk is so personal. Some days it's worth it. Some days it's not. Jumping is worth it. Is one jump ever worth it? No, one jump is never worth it. But that's for each of us to make as a choice when we're at the exit or when we're getting in the car to go to the exit. And I was so driven at one point that a lot of that was just secondary, and now it's very primary. So, I mean, things have changed, but not because I'm a dad or because I'm older or because I'm decrepit and sore all the time, but because it's either important enough to do or it's not. And that changes as it should.
I agree. I think I have the same level of fire, but it's from different fuel sources.
Yeah.
And we're so lucky to live here, but I had better access to currency as well where I used to live. And I have to take that into account as well, because for me to ignore the currency, regardless of the amount of experience I had in the past, I've seen firsthand what happens when people try to take a bunch of time off and they go, okay, where was I before?
Totally.
Let's just go ahead and go right back to that point. And I would be a moron to ignore that in myself. So I still have the desire, but it's for different reasons too.
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to Greg's podcast with you. He said something that really made a lot of sense to me. There was a time in life where I used to play a lot of jiu-jitsu, I was into judo and jiu-jitsu. And
you were?
Mm-hmm.
Of course you were. You're a fucking
no.
living example of a Renaissance man. Do you do pottery as well?
My wife does. She's an amazing potter.
Dude, let me get what else? Watercolor?
No.
God damn it.
Yeah.
Do you write like long novels in cursive?
I'll send you one tonight. No. But I did. There was a time where, it's funny. It was a time where I'd never felt tougher. I was like a dumb kid in my 20s, and I was working construction, building homes and commercial construction during the day, rolling at the dojo until 10:30 or 11 at night, doing that 5 days a week, and then ice climbing in the winter. And it's like one of those deals. Climbing a steep pillar doesn't sound so bad when you've been carrying 3/4 inch OSB in the wind in double insulated overalls all day in the snow in Montana.
So few people will get that reference, but growing up on a construction site, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember being sore one night playing like rolling randori, because I gotten blown off a ladder. It's like one of those times in life. And of course, at 20, you got rubber bones, right?
Yeah.
But I remember him saying that when he moved to a school, a jiu-jitsu school, where the instructors just like beat the brakes off of him.
Yeah.
He wanted to just say, look, I was a brown belt.
wanted to start over. Yeah.
So, once again, at this stage, if I was to, as an example to currency, if I was to go back to jiu-jitsu, which I've actually thought about recently, I'd just want to start over, just fucking start over, because there's so much value in revisiting all of those.
Well, it goes right back
steps.
to the mindset of being a beginner.
Yeah.
There's a great gym, an SBG gym, actually in Missoula.
Really?
Yeah, I'm good friends with, so there's 3 here in the Flathead. There's Whitefish Big Fork in Kalispell, and then there's SBG Missoula. I actually was physically there for the first time not too long ago, just passing through, but I will warn you that the head coach is 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
God damn it. If he gets a hold of you,
it's over.
It's just really not awesome.
Yeah. Well, I remember the dojo I was at, it was like, you puke on my mat, you're going to bleed on my mat,
It's been, I've loved, that's one of the fires, like I said, I still have the exact same level of motivation, but it just burns from different places. And for me, jiu-jitsu has been an awesome one. And I think I found it at a time where it allowed me to get a better context of why I was jumping. Alex's death impacted me pretty deeply because of the experience that we had shared, and I had been there through, I was there for his first jump in Monte Brento, and I was fucking dying laughing because he was shaking physically so hard. So of course I'm just talking shit. I'm like, what's wrong with you, dude? Can you control your leg? He's just like, shut. Like, that's the funniest video. And then we were the same size, so I'd give him my old wingsuits, and it was his death, and I was actually there when he had a few close calls, and I wish I had chewed his ass harder. There's some regret involved in that as well, too. But I got so much out of base jumping at a personal level.
Yeah.
Whether it's, moving these up or down, or it's just, living in the moment strips away. I fucking thought about what to post on Instagram as I'm getting ready to huck it off the Jungfrau. Like, get the fuck out of here.
That's right.
And finding jiu-jitsu, which I was resistant to at first because people just wouldn't shut up about it. I'm like, if you're this vocal about it, it must suck.
Yeah, right.
The 180 degrees incorrect philosophy, apparently, and found it, and it was directly into the learning curve, the learning pool that you're talking about, surrounded by people who are better at it. It doesn't even make sense how they're able to do some of the things that they can do, and then you start to learn, and you realize, for me, it's a mental chess match more than a physical chess match, and I feel like I've always responded, and it's kept my motivation at such a high level. And I really do think it gave me that buffer from jumping to realize that I still want to do it, and there's a part of me that probably needs it, but it's going to be at a different level.
Yeah, and I think that it's really unique. And like I said, I haven't trained in a long time, and I was never at the level that you are, or whatever.
I just started. I've been at it for under 2 years. So.
Yeah, and I trained hard for several years and achieved a particular level. But like I said, I would choose to start over. But either way, I remember the way it applies to life is very similar in some like sort of minute ways that base jumping does. Like, and another thing that was said on that podcast that I listened to recently with you and Greg was this idea of being exposed to something to a point at which you become more aware and tactical, and it's such a thinking game as opposed to this idea that it's a physical match between two people. And you realize that if you end up with an adrenaline and a cortisol dump, you're combat ineffective in 60 seconds, right? And you can't even lift your arms off the mat. But once you've been exposed to it, you can roll for 15, 20, 30 minutes with someone, and it's a thinking game, and you're trying to always see the openings and utilize weight shift in a way that that allows for advantage. And you're not fighting someone. You're actually trying to outthink them in a way that is, it's essential and in a very primitive way important that you do.
And once you realize the value of that and you actually start training, it changes your perspective altercations with other people.
For sure. And
It's because it's not, if you have two people who it's like, well, I guess I went to the gym more than you, like the gymnasium. It's like, let's see who's lucky.
Right. Well, that's I have no doubt you're tough, but you better be fucking fit.
Yeah. It's like you're relying on other things, whereas, then you engage your mind, and it's a completely different.
But applicable, because then you have a conversation with someone where your opinions might differ. And instead of getting all worked up about it, you can very calmly put your ego aside and say, hey, I totally hear what you're saying. And we don't agree on that, but
which is fine.
But I'm not devalidating your opinion. And, you can not just disarm someone, but you can have really positive and constructive discourse and dialogue with someone. And now you're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
And that comes from this same skill set that it takes to hold your mud on an exit, the same skill set that it takes to think a problem through when shit's going real fast and consequences are high, and the same skill set that it takes when you're rolling with someone that's much better than you, and your goal is to learn and to experience and to improve as not just a player, but as a human being, And to me, I think there's a lot of value in that. It's certainly, as cliche as it sounds, it's certainly helped me interact with my kid, to diffuse certain things and just to realize that some battles, they don't even need to be battles. It's just stupid. What's really important to her and super trivial for me, it's still important to me because it's important to her and she's important to me. You know what I mean?
I do. One of my favorite, I don't know if it'd be a quote or a philosophy, and I forget exactly who I heard it from, but ties right into jiu-jitsu is, don't try to move somebody else. Move yourself. You're going to fail if you're sitting there just constantly trying to shove somebody, it's almost a futile effort. What you need to do is get a set of frames and then maneuver yourself. You're like, oh, yeah, well, shit. That applies to just about everything in life.
Yeah, how can you control someone else when you can't even control yourself, It's like I used to climb, trying to climb harder grades, and every time I'd get to a crux, I would hold my breath, and I never forget my buddy who's a fucking monkey, he would just say, dude, how do you ever expect to climb 514 if you don't even know how to breathe?
Yeah. A little bit of cart before the horse on it.
Yeah. Good point.
So we've talked about so much stuff that we do in Montana. I forgot to ask you, how did you end up back here? Or how did you end up here in the first place? Because you obviously, near Seattle.
Yep. My wife was born and raised in Billings.
Okay.
Her family moved to the same general vicinity in Washington that I lived when she was 14 or something. We met in high school, and kind of the classic high school sweetheart story. Some people grow apart. We grew together. It was great. Kind of didn't even know who we would turn into, but very fortunately, we managed to keep our paths parallel. Been married a long time. And when I think it must have been a year after I graduated from college, or somewhere a couple years after I graduated from college, I had been driving the 520 twice a day in Seattle and spending 3 hours a day in my car in traffic was
contemplating suicide.
Was exactly a fucking gun in the mouth. So I was over it, and I wasn't liking who I was becoming. Right, it's like road rage. Everybody, fuck you. I didn't want to be in there. So we had the opportunity when her family moved back to Missoula to come, and I had this opportunity to design and build an indoor climbing gym. I graduated from college the first time with a degree in industrial design. So as a climber, I had been working with some modular companies building modular climbing walls and making molds for climbing holds. And so I came to Montana to sort of be the foreman of a job in which the task was to design and build a large indoor climbing gym. And we just fell in love with the place and wanted to stay. And we've been here ever since. That was 97. So we've been here for 23 years. And traveling all over the world, man, there's no place I'd rather come home to than Western Montana. This place is amazing. Shh, don't tell anybody.
People get pissed at me.
I know, dude, I'm telling you.
It's like, hey, just so you know, buddy, everybody knew about your fishing hole long before I showed up here.
Well, so much so that I almost puked in my mouth when I just said that out loud. It's like, Montana's cool. Oh, wait, I didn't mean it. But I discovered that everything that I'm interested in is here. And, people that live here, economically, it's not the most, prosperous place to be.
It's
So
not, yeah.
so really the people who live here full time are here because of, happiness and recreation, like outdoor the convenience of outdoor recreation. So, I love it here, and don't see myself moving anywhere anytime soon.
I don't think I could. I actually went to Lewis and Clark Elementary for a couple of years.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I very
Wow.
vaguely remember it. So my dad and mom,
Yeah, where did you grow up?
Santa Cruz, California.
Oh, wow.
And then my dad moved, well, my dad and mom moved us to Missoula. I remember throwing snowballs at cars coming down the road and then going to Lewis and Clark, and we would have, what's that damn game on the monkey bars where you try to basically ferociously shake each other off? King of the Cage or whatever it was, but we would do it when it was like a foot of slush, right at those transitional seasons where there was severe consequences to augering.
If you're going to get hurt, you might as well get wet,
Yeah. So yeah, it was just basically you're going to go home if you failed in that one. So, but from Santa Cruz to there, and it was, from my understanding, my dad served in Vietnam, and he sought out some pretty intensive counseling here in the area. But he played for the Missoula Maggots, the rugby team.
Wow.
He's still got a bunch of friends. I remember walking over, watching those fucking savages play.
Still.
They're ridiculously, unacceptably short shorts. I don't know why rugby requires that level of upper leg to be exposed.
Yeah,
but
because if you're that tough, you can wear whatever the fuck you want.
you just wear a jockstrap then. If you're going to, it's about the same cubic square inches of material.
Right.
Yeah, but we and then moved back to Northern California very briefly to a town called Sebastopol, and that's when the earthquake hit, and my dad dove back into masonry because San Andreas Fault runs right through Santa Cruz, and I worked for him probably from I was 11 until I joined the military, but there was still earthquake damage those years later. I mean, the earthquake was in '89, and
Right.
I left high school in '96, and we'll get to your fireplace.
Yeah.
So mostly West Coast, and then came up and visited a few times, and it's so different. The pace of life, the feel of life. And I remember we moved up here, and one of the things that I've enjoyed in the the COVID era is the lack of travel, because I travel a ton for work.
Yeah.
I actually don't do anything for a living here in Montana. I mean, I'd love to get it to a point where I could sit down and have people come in and do podcasts and have awesome conversations, but whether or not that happens, I don't know. I'm going to pursue it. So otherwise I have to travel, but being able to be here and to appreciate what we have, we're lucky for sure.
Yeah, I'm finding myself more and more wanting to stay put, and
My favorite flights are the ones that land back at Glacier International.
for sure.
Fuck.
For sure. I know, man. The last several years I've been traveling, some years almost every single month. And this has been an interesting sort of rekindle. I've rediscovered the value of just being quiet and being home. And
I didn't realize the impact that the travel had on me. I
too.
constantly feel, I guess it would describe it as, I would feel like I had a guillotine over my neck.
Yeah.
I'd get back from a trip and it's like 3 days, slam it all in.
Well, and you should tell me this too. Okay, so and I sort of equate this, long after the industrial design, I went back to school and became a respiratory care practitioner, respiratory therapist, and worked in an ICU for, 8 years or something. And I worked nights for the first half of that. And I remember when I switched from night shift to day shift, I was never aware of how fucking tired I was all the time, right? And so it was kind of like waking up from a 5-year nap. And I think when I was living that lifestyle where we, guys like us would travel and we'd go do these things, and a thing would be racing a hang glider every day for 3 weeks in Australia, where every single day, you're showing up, entering a task in your computer with 150 other dudes. Is very intense. The weather is growing, and you're kind of like, what's anticipation of the day. You race fucking to the wall every single day. Sometimes people get hurt. Sometimes people die.
Yeah.
And you end the day after 150 miles at some goal field, drink a beer, head back, and go to sleep because you're dead tired after downloading your instrument till 11:30 at night. And then you start and you do it again the next day. You do that for 3 weeks. You fly home. Man, it's like the world is in slow motion, and it's almost like it's lonely, right? Like I'm not operating in the same headspace as everybody else. And my wife would be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why are you so grumpy? You've been on vacation for 3 weeks. And I'd be like, I don't know. And you know what it came to is a realization that it was a bit of a chemical imbalance. Like I would have this chemical dump every single day for 3 weeks, and then I'd come home and that wouldn't be there.
Be a void of it, you know?
It's almost like a drug-induced bipolar or something, you know. And obviously I don't mean to be insensitive or to say that it's that level. It's not, but I would definitely feel different and almost like I had earplugs in and everything was in slow motion for a few days until I kind of normalized. And I find that the more I'm home and like recharge at home and go on these adventures, I feel like I did when I stopped working at the hospital, that I'm kind of waking up and more aware and more grateful and you know, sort of more in tune with the in between. It's not routine life anymore with intensity in between. It's all exactly as it is, and there's a lot more balance. And I see the value in a quiet morning on the deck drinking coffee and watching the sun come up over the mountains. Every bit as much value in that as I do, you know, landing in the middle of nowhere in Mongolia under a paraglider. It's the same. If I recognize that there's value in both places and take the time to be present enough to experience the value instead of always thinking about what's coming next. And isn't it so relative to time?
That's what would get me. Yeah, I think what would get me is that it's the next. What is next? And you know, I can tie it all the way back to my military career. It's such a task-oriented job. But if you knock one down, guess what? Bing, another one comes up. Boom, boom, boom,
Right.
boom, 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 boom. And you just have your foot on the gas and your foot on the gas. What's the next? What's the next? What's the next? And what you're missing is what's the now.
What's the now?
And
It's
I
always
think,
now, right?
Yeah, I think I really don't want my life to go back to what it was with that level of travel. I'm just going to craft and figure out a way and fucking force it if I have to. I'll shove my plans down the world's throat.
Yeah. No, this Austrian climber friend of mine, who's I'm sorry, not Austrian, he would kill me, Slovenian.
I was hoping you were going to say Australian because we could have got a Dumb and Dumber reference.
Yeah.
Put
No,
another
no.
shrimp on the boat.
No, Slovenian, he would kill me if he heard me call him Austrian. He's somebody that I respect almost as much, if not more than anybody else on the planet. He's just, he's an amazing human being and his head's in the right place. And he would call himself a complete beginner at everything. And he's like the most capable human I know. And we shared base camp for a little while in India, and he was in the same place in Tibet that I was. We share a lot in common, but he made a statement recently that I thought was really, once again, sometimes these things, when you repeat them, they sound a bit like a fortune cookie, but pretty interesting. He said, the faster I live, the less I remember. And what I find is that my level of presence connected to time is totally relative. In other words, when life is going by really fast, it's because I'm constantly thinking about what's coming.
Yeah.
What's happening 2 weeks from now? That's what I'm looking forward to. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to get to do this. And then 2 weeks goes by like this. But if I'm in a base camp in the Himalayas and all I have to do today is acclimatize, read a book, walk around, look at the river, and the day lasts a lifetime. It's a day feels like forever.
Yeah.
And I think if the more I can stay present, the longer my life will seem and the more I will remember. And I think that that's somehow inherently, I think that that's important.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's really hard to do. I feel like most people, myself included, will get caught in the trap of what's the next.
Of course.
Either activity or thing, right? You just put
Well, because we're the type of individual I want to be, the happiest I am is when I'm inspired. And when I'm inspired, I'm motivated. And when I'm motivated, I wake up excited, right? I'm excited to work towards that goal, or I'm excited about the goal or whatever. And so, the hard part becomes be inspired, be motivated, work towards that goal, but enjoy putting the right foot in front of the other on your way to it. Because, man, the best things in my life have been, I'm walking this direction and I don't even get there because all these other things start happening on the sides, and I wouldn't even have the opportunity to go this completely different direction if I hadn't started walking that way in the first place. But if I pay attention to here and now, then those side doors and those avenues and those opportunities remain in the vision, you know?
Yeah.
But if I'm so focused on this thing, then I'm going to miss out on a lot of shit, you know?
Easier said than done.
Fucking A. No, it is. You're right.
So,
It
yeah, God damn it. It's got so much value, too. We need to actually start participating in some of these awesome things that we've spent nearly 3 hours talking about, which didn't feel like 3 hours at all.
Yeah.
So we should link up again.
Let's do. And, man, yeah, all kinds of adventures in Montana, in the bush plane. I think, you know, between the skill sets,
we're going to be okay.
We got all kinds of trouble to get into.
We're going to be just fine. Thanks for making the drive up,
man. I really
appreciate
you having me. Yeah, thanks.
We'll do it again for sure.
Yeah, it was a real honor, man. I really appreciate it.